Chapter 161, River of Warriors. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu and Princess Huowu left the hillside cave, and headed towards the north. Both of them were extremely strong. So, they were safe as long as they didn't come across a Xian level ominous beast, or a large group of beasts. A large river appeared in front of them after they had walked for 2 days. The river was dozens of feet wide. Several big waves of water could be seen flowing at a great speed. It was issuing a thunderous sound of gurgling. This is the famous river, the River of Warriors, of the Portal of the Brave Warriors, right? There's a forbidden area across the river. It's called the Central Region. Several rays of lights flickered in Shi Mu's eyes as he looked at the wide river in front of him. He then said, Shi Mu's goal was to go into the forbidden area on the opposite side of the large river. But, the river gave him a treacherous feeling. It didn't seem easy to cross. Yes, Priest Yanya once told me that the barbarians had put a formidable seal in the ancient times, so that the vicious beasts of Xian level or above living on the other side of the river never cross it. But, I don't know whether it's true or false, Princess Huowu replied as she looked at the river. Shi Mu moved his vision, and puckered up his brows. He then turned his head towards the left side, and looked. A golden light flashed in his pupils. He saw that a row of 5 or 6 figures were moving towards them from a distant place. Princess Huowu's charming face changed. She gripped the hilt of her sword on her waist with one hand, and slipped her other hand inside her sleeves. It's nothing, these are the men of the peaceful barbarian tribes. The golden glow in Shi Mu's eyes disappeared. He then informed her in a soft voice. Princess Huowu exposed expressions of surprise on her face. She had increased her eyesight by practicing several cultivation methods. But still, she couldn't clearly see these men coming from a distance. But, Shi Mu was impressively capable of seeing over such a long distance. She glanced towards Shi Mu. He had seemed shrouded in layers of mysterious veils ever since they had met the saintess of the sea race. And, she had been wishing to see through these layers ever since. The peaceful barbarians approached nearer after a while. Princess Huowu's complexion loosened up as Shi Mu's words had turned out to be true. 2 people in the front of the group had taken the lead. One of them was wearing clothes of the Green-Tooth tribe, and seemed to be around 30 years old. The other man's upper body was bare, but a golden feather crest was braided in his head. This was the symbol of the Golden Feather tribe, one of the 4 peaceful barbarian tribes. The 2 people had powerful aura around their bodies. They were the consummate level Hotian warriors. A few of the other men looked a little weaker in comparison, but they too had the strength of an advanced stage Hotian warrior. They were talking to each other. Shi Mu with his strength of a middle-level Hotian warrior seemed puny in front of them. So, it's our noble guests of the human race, the big man of the Green-Tooth tribe exposed a smile on his face, and greeted them affectionately. Brother Mo Lang, Princess Huowu answered with a smile on her face. Shi Mu stood half a step behind Princess Huowu, he also smiled at them. He and Princess Huowu had stayed with the Green-Tooth tribe after they had arrived at the Holy Mountain. So, the people of the Green-Tooth tribe were a little familiar to them. In fact, they had met Mo Lang twice before. Let me introduce you to Brother Jin Huang of the Golden Feather tribe. Mo Lang laughed out loud. He then pointed a finger towards the young barbarian with a golden feather crest braided in his head and said. The youth with the feathered crest was silent. He had a cold expression on his face. Princess Huowu and Shi Mu nodded towards him, but didn't say anything. Brother Jin has some etiquettes. Huowu didn't mind Jin Huang's cold attitude towards them. Instead, she laughed and said. Shi Mu looked towards Jin Huang and the huge blade with circular edge that was suspended on his back. The edge was covered with saw teeth, and was emitting a thick cold light. He felt surprised in his heart. He could see some witch magic characters on the surface of this thing with circular edge and saw teeth. It was clearly a witch magic tool, and its grade was certainly not low. This was definitely a killing weapon. Shi Mu became lost in thoughts while looking at the cold barbarian. Jin Huang felt strange, and turned his head to look at Shi Mu. Shi Mu's chain of thoughts was broken as their eyes met. His eyes felt a slight prick, but his facial expression didn't change. Shi Mu exposed a smile, but Jin Huang looked away. Jin Huang raised his brow. He then glanced at Shi Mu to make a few observations. After that, he slowly moved away. Mo Lang then introduced the rest of the 4 barbarian men. 2 of them were from the beautiful Gauze tribe and the other 2 were from the Crowhorn tribe. These peaceful barbarians had nothing in common, but they had the same point of view. In fact, they had a harmonious relationship. Brother Mo Lang, I don't know why you people have come to the River of Warriors. What's the matter? They chatted for a while. Then, Princess Huowu got to the point and asked. We've been together since the last 2 days. We hunted down 2 vicious beasts in a nearby area some time back. Now, we're looking for other prey. Why don't you travel with us on this journey if you don't have any specific target? Mo Lang chuckled and said. Well, this forbidden area is indeed very dangerous. So, it would be safer to travel together. Princess Huowu exchanged glances with Shi Mu. She then nodded in an amicable manner. That's great. Mo Lang exposed colors of happiness on his face and laughed heartily. They didn't speak to Shi Mu much since he was only a Hotian middle-level warrior. However, they were very optimistic about Huowu's strength. After all, the union of the human race had sent this person. So, there must be a lot of treasures up her sleeve. Where are we going? Do you have any plan? Princess Huowu asked. There's no specific place to go. We just want to go along the River of Warriors as far as possible, and hunt down some Hotian consummate-level ominous beasts, Mo Lang said. But, the real prey must be on the opposite side of the river. Princess Huowu's beautiful pupils flashed. She then said. The barbarian men were flabbergasted as they heard this. Princess Huowu, are you implying that you wish to go to the other side of the river? Mo Lang and Jin Huang looked at each other, and exposed smiles on their faces. Yes, Princess Huowu said lightly. It had been 4 or 5 days since they had entered this forbidden area. The princess had gradually become aware of the difference between the peaceful and vicious barbarians. She knew that it was impossible for the peaceful barbarians to win if they didn't take the risk to hunt down high-level ominous beasts. But, many ominous beasts of Xian-Tian level hide on the opposite side. They're extremely strong. They'll definitely kill us if we come across them, a big man from the Crowhorn tribe argued. The 2 barbarians from the beautiful Gauze tribe also shook their heads. It was obvious that they didn't wish to go into the central region. Princess Huowu puckered up her elegant eyebrows. She then turned her head, and looked towards Shi Mu. Since the princess wants to go across, I'll also go with you, Shi Mu spoke up without any hesitation. The 4 men of the Crowhorn tribe and beautiful Gauze tribe looked in disdain towards Shi Mu as they heard this. Shi Mu was ready to enter the forbidden area with these people. But, he was only a middle-level Hotian warrior. So, it was a miracle that he was still alive. In addition, he had told lies to enter into their holy land. So, it seemed to these people that he was going to court his death in the central region. You two, what do you say? Princess Huowu didn't pay attention to the 2 people of the Crowhorn and beautiful Gauze tribes each. She looked towards Mo Lang and Jin Huang, and asked. What Princess Huowu said is exactly what I was thinking. I was indeed planning to go to the central region for a good fight, Mo Lang laughed and replied. The 4 barbarian men of the Crowhorn and beautiful Gauze tribes became surprised as they heard this. Gentlemen, we only have 4 or 5 days remaining. Half of the time has already passed. Everyone knows what benefits we have made till now. We know that the vicious barbarian tribes are much stronger than us. If we don't take this risk, then we'll lose our chances of winning this competition, Mo Lang said in a heavy tone. The two men of the beautiful Gauze tribe showed a little hesitation on their faces as they heard this. Brother Mo Lang, please forgive us. We can't agree to go to the central region. This competition is important, but we can't put our lives in so much danger. So, we'll have to part ways from here if you're determined to go into the central region. A lofty barbarian man of the Crowhorn tribe shook his head and said. Well, I can't force you. Mo Lang wrinkled his brows and nodded. The two men of the Crowhorn tribe cupped their hands in greeting, and turned around to walk into the distance. Brother Mo Lang, the central region is too dangerous for us. We too can't help you in this operation. The two men of the beautiful Gauze tribe exposed apologetic expressions on their faces, and spoke up in embarrassing tone. You two are modest. That area is extremely dangerous. It was obvious that you've made up your minds on how to act. Mo Lang smiled regretfully and replied. The two men of the beautiful Gauze tribe cupped their hands in greeting. Then, they too started to walk towards a distant place. But, they didn't go in the direction of the two men of the Crowhorn tribe. Now, only Shi Mu, the princess, and the other two people were left at that place. Nobody spoke for a while. Only the four of us are left now. We're few in number, but now the operation will be much more convenient. Mo Lang smiled and said. We have to determine the ways to cross this river. But, I think that this large river isn't safe at all. I'm afraid that it wouldn't be easy to cross this river, Shi Mu spoke up in a casual tone. You two probably aren't aware of what brother Shi just said. A kind of a carnivorous swordfish grows in the River of Warriors. They're very large in number, and extremely violent. They attack any living creature that enters into the water of this river. And, if the fish is sentient, then it can do some unpleasant damage, Mo Lang explained further with a dignified complexion. Swordfish? I can't see them now, Princess Huowu raised her brow and said. Jin Huang hadn't spoken all along. Suddenly, he took out a piece of fresh meat from a rucksack on his body. It had a few small wisps of blood on its surface. It seemed to have been cut out of the body of an ominous beast. He then went forward, and threw it into the River of Warriors. Suddenly, a silver light appeared, and rushed over from the abyss of the river as soon as the piece of meat entered into the water. Shi Mu's vision flashed. His face exposed a trace of astonishment. That silver light was a slender silver-colored fish. Its body seemed to be as sharp as a sword. It was only half a foot long. Several silver thorns could be seen on the top of its upper jaw. They seemed like swords. The water around the piece of meat lump churned up as several silver swordfishes surrounded it. They formed a shape of a huge silver ball, and splattered everywhere. Bang! The silver ball formed by the swordfishes dissipated with a loud rumbling sound after a short while. Then, the fishes swam back into the depth of the river. They disappeared without a trace in a flash. The piece of fresh meat had also disappeared, not even a little trace of the meat was left behind. Chapter 162, Green Frost Fruit. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The surface of the water was moving up and down in waves. Princess Huowu wrinkled her brows, and let out a deep breath as she saw the undulating water surface. Shi Mu's face exposed an irresolute color. Can it be that the sentient beasts of the central region don't come to the surrounding area because they're afraid of these swordfishes? Shi Mu thought. But, he didn't say anything aloud. The two of you were already aware of the existence of these swordfishes. So, you must also know the countermeasures, and the ways to cross this river, Princess Huowu moved her beautiful eyes and asked. Of course. In fact, it's quite simple. We only need to cut down some big trees, and make a raft of thick wood. Then, we can ride on the raft and cross the river. Mo Lang smiled and nodded. He then explained. Shi Mu and Princess Huowu were startled. Is it that simple? Princess Huowu asked doubtfully. Would the pointed teeth of these swordfishes not resist the raft? Shi Mu seemed worried. What if the swordfishes attacked and sank the wooden raft? Then, they'd have to confront these thousands of swordfishes in the water. Perhaps, many of them had Xian level strength. They might not be able to withdraw until after their entire bodies had been severely injured if that were the case. Brother Shi Mu, please relax. Our people have been going into the central region using this method for generations. So, this method is well tested. We will make the wooden raft as strong and thick as possible if Brother Shi is so worried, Mo Lang replied with confidence. Brother Mo Lang seems extremely sure. Is it possible that you've entered this forbidden area before, and have used this method to go to the other side of the river? Princess Huowu pursed up her lips, and asked with a faint smile on her face. Mo Lang's expression changed a bit. He then nodded in a hesitant manner. Shi Mu's heart moved. But, the expressions on his face didn't change. In that case, I'm relieved. Princess Huowu smiled. After that, Shi Mu turned around and started to walk towards the woods. The four people began to work together. They had made a 9 meters wide and 15 meters long wooden raft within a span of 2 hours. Shi Mu laid 3 additional logs on the base of the boat to ensure complete safety. Then, Mo Lang took out a white animal hide, and set it up on one side as the sail of this raft. After that, the 4 people got on the boat. Mo Lang then drew out a green witch charm. It was made up of animal skin. He then started to recite a few incantations. The animal skin ignited, and sprayed out green rays of light. It then generated a gale out of thin air, and set the sail in movement with a blow. The raft started to move in the water as if it was flying. Shi Mu stood on the wooden raft with an alert face. He was tightly gripping the hilt of his black blade. Moreover, he was secretly holding a black animal hide magic charm in the sleeve of his other hand. It was the same witch charm that he had stolen from the bald barbarian of the fierce snake tribe. He had found 2 charms at that time, but he had already activated one of them. He had discovered that witchcraft contained in this magic charm was quite similar to the low-level wind attribute magic charm, the wind wing technique. It could attract a gale so strong that a man could ride the wind, and glide for a distance. Shi Mu had heard about this wind wing technique, but had only seen it in the ancient books and records of magic charms. Princess Huowu looked around in all the directions. She had withdrawn her hands into her sleeves. She seemed to be holding a few life-saving magic charms in the secrecy of her sleeves as well. Mo Lang and Jin Huang had used this method to cross the river of the warrior before. So, their expressions were relatively tranquil. Fortunately, Mo Lang's method turned out to be very useful. They remained seated on the wooden raft the entire way, as if they were traveling in ordinary river water. They didn't encounter any accident. Shi Mu jumped to the shore as soon as the wooden raft docked to safety. He felt calm in his heart only after he planted his feet firmly on the ground. He then safely kept the magic charm of the wind wing technique, and looked in the surroundings. He was left startled. He had been on an alert while he was crossing the river. So, he hadn't examined the surroundings earlier. However, he had now realized that the river had parted this area into 2 sections. And, this side of the land was extremely different from the other side. The species of flowers, plants, and trees were almost the same. But, their size was 2 times bigger than that on the opposite side of the river. You two are familiar with the central region. So, where should we go first? Princess Huowu's voice echoed. Princess, please wait for a moment. Brother Jin. It's your turn. Mo Lang turned to Jin Huang. Jin Huang didn't speak, but took out a yellow animal hide map from his clothes. Is it the map of the central region? Princess Huowu was flabbergasted. Jin Huang nodded. He then carefully started to compare the yellow hide map with his surroundings. He eventually estimated their current location. Shi Mu took a glance at the map. He then moved his eyes, and drew half a step backwards. After that, he secretly took out a small animal hide. He had also drawn a map. But, it was too simple compared to the one in Mo Lang's hand. He had briefly marked several locations on his map. He had obtained this information from the books and personal letters of Min Tu. There were several locations where the multi-headed python might exist. He compared the map in his hand with Mo Lang's. A ray of light flashed in his eyes. Then, he returned the map to its original place. "We'll go along this direction." Jin Huang pointed his finger at a certain point on the map after a while. Jin Huang had pointed in the direction which was going several kilometers deep into the central region. "Isn't it inappropriate to go directly into the central region?" Princess Huowu asked. "Princess Huowu, it was you who had proposed to cross the river to hunt down ominous beasts in the central region. Is it possible that you want to stop here now, and not go forward?" Jin Huang's complexion sank. He seemed to be a little displeased. "Yes, it is. After all, we have limited strength. It's not a problem to handle some ominous beasts of Houtian summit level with our combined strength. But, if we encounter an ambush of ominous beasts of Xian level, then I'm afraid that it'll become extremely difficult for us to even escape from this place." Princess Huowu's voice became cold. "Your Highness, don't get angry. The four of us have the same goal. It's important, and would be beneficial to hunt as many ominous beasts as possible in the remaining days. The gains won't be able to make up for the losses if you two make pointless arguments at this juncture." Mo Lang saw Princess Huowu and Jin Huang in a state of mutual hostility. So, he hurriedly spoke up in order to resolve the matter. "I think that the two of you are trying to cover up something. You've come to the central region with some other purpose than to kill ominous beasts, right?" Shi Mu was silent. Suddenly, he exposed a smile on his face and said, "Brother Shi, what do you mean by this?" Mo Lang raised his brows. "It's better to speak forthrightly if you two people have some other purpose. Otherwise, we'll take different roads from here." Shi Mu glanced at Mo Lang and Jin Huang as he spoke up in a dull tone. An astounded look flashed through Princess Huowu's face. But, she was smart enough to not speak anything. Mo Lang exchanged a meaningful glance with Jin Huang as he heard this. "I'm sorry. We've indeed hid something from you. So, I ask for your forgiveness. The reason that we didn't explain this to you earlier is that this place is quite dangerous. It would have been inappropriate for others to know." Mo Lang forced a smile, and cupped his hand towards Shi Mu and the princess. Shi Mu laughed mischievously. Huowu got frightened in her heart. But, the two of them didn't say anything at this point. "We indeed have come to the central region with other purposes. I don't know if you've heard the name of the green frost fruit." Mo Lang continued to speak. "Green frost fruit?" Shi Mu revealed a thoughtful expression on his face. "Is the green frost fruit found here?" Princess Huowu's complexion changed. The princess is very experienced and knowledgeable. "Yes. This immortal fruit is indeed found in the central region. It's in the area where we're going towards." Mo Lang revealed fiery expressions in his bright eyes and said. Princess Huowu exhaled a deep breath, and her face exposed colors of desire. "I wonder what the green frost fruit is." Shi Mu wrinkled his brows. "The green frost fruit grows in extremely cold and dark places. This spiritual fruit is grown and nurtured over 100 years, and is extremely precious. It's effective in blood and marrow cleansing process, so much so that one can even break through the bottleneck of Xian level with it," Princess Huowu quickly explained. The colors of desire in her eyes brightened up even further as she did. Shi Mu felt greatly surprised in his heart. The value of a fruit that could help him break through the Xian bottleneck was beyond measure. "A snowy peak will appear after we've covered a distance of about 15 kilometers in this direction. A dark green spiritual tree grows inside a secret ice cave beneath that snowy peak. That tree bears a dark green fruit in abundance. There would be enough for the four of us to distribute among ourselves." Mo Lang looked at the changed expressions on the faces of Shi Mu and Princess Huowu. He then narrowed his eyes and said. Princess Huowu's complexion got brightened up. How did the two of you find the ice cave where this fruit is hidden? Shi Mu asked in a calm manner. The last time when the portal of warriors was opened, the two of us were chasing a witch beast. We had accidentally found that ice cave at that time, Mo Lang replied with unvaried expressions. There would probably be a spiritual beast guarding over this kind of a heavenly treasure. Is this why you couldn't pick it the last time? Shi Mu wrinkled his brows. That's right. The ice cave has been seized by an ice crystal scorpion of consummate stage of the Ho Tien level. It can endure the strength of Xian Tian initial level by taking advantage of the landform. Moreover, the two of us had far less strength at that time. So, we had no other choice but to go back. Mo Lang forced a smile and elaborated. We've carefully researched about it, and we've prepared a special way to deal with the ice crystal scorpion. But, it would need the four of us to act together. So, we can behead the ice crystal scorpion as long as the two of you promise to help us. And then, we'll divide the green frost fruit evenly. Mo Lang made a vow and said. Why does it require 4 people? Princess Huo Wu asked. The method that we've prepared is mainly a collection of witchcraft trapping spells. It would need the capability of 3 people to activate it, and the 4th person would be in charge of luring the scorpion into the trap. This trap would be able to hold the ice crystal scorpion for a long period of time. Then, we'll pick the fruit and run away, Jin Huang explained. Princess Huo Wu's complexion cleared up as she heard this. Mo Lang and his companion rejoiced after they saw the changed expression on Princess Huo Wu's face. However, Shi Mu had wrinkled his brows. But, he didn't say anything. He had never heard about this ice crystal scorpion. But it would certainly not be an ordinary beast if it was the guardian of the green frost fruit. Shi Mu's purpose was to kill a Xian Tian level multi-headed python, and collect its beast soul. This green frost fruit was indeed precious, but it didn't attract him much. After all, it was more important for him to preserve his life than to upgrade or cultivate it. Chapter 163, The Ice Crystal Scorpion. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Brother Shi, what do you think? Princess Huo Wu noticed Shi Mu's hesitation. She then asked slowly, she seemed to be tempted. Your Royal Highness, you can make any decision. I won't have any objection to it, Shi Mu nodded and replied. He wanted to refuse. But then, he had a second thought. The ice cave and the multi-headed python's hideout were in the same direction according to the map. So, he could follow them. Then, he wouldn't have to take a long route. After all, these 2 men of the consummate level of Ho Tien realm were leading the way. Moreover, they were already familiar with the environment of the central region. So, it was safer to be dependent on them than to be on his own. Moreover, it would be extremely beneficial for him if he would conveniently get a green frost fruit. Well, let's go and have a look, Princess Huo Wu said in a calm tone. Well, the matter should not be delayed. We should set off right away, Mo Lang and the other man said in exultation. The 4 people did some preparations for the next few hours. Then, they headed towards the direction of the snowy peak as per the animal skin map in Jin Wang's hand. Contrary to Shi Mu's expectations, the landform of the central region was fickle and spacious. They didn't encounter any Xian Tian ominous beasts in the entire journey, apart from a few migrant Ho Tien beasts. Mo Lang explained the reason. The Xian Tian ominous beasts that lived in the peak of the central region weren't many in number. In addition, most of them had their own habitats. So, they wouldn't come out as long as they weren't provoked. The 4 people didn't have any fear of the Ho Tien ominous beasts, they could deal with them easily even if they weren't able to avoid them. Around 12 hours later, under a mountain peak, Shi Mu concentrated at the cave's mouth in front of him. It was 10 feet wide. His expressions were normal. But, his eyes flickered and penetrated through the heavy atmosphere. It was dark. So, it couldn't be estimated how deep the cave was. The atmosphere outside the cave was warm. But, Thick cold air could be sensed from the cave's mouth. "Here it is. Let's go inside," Mo Lang said. Then, he entered the cave without any hesitation. Jin Huang remained silent, and followed closely behind him. Shi Mu and Princess Huo Wu looked at each other with hope. Then, they also stepped inside the cave. Shi Mu's complexion changed as soon as he entered the cave. He had sensed dense and cold air blowing outside the cave. But now, it felt like they had entered into an ice house. Gloomy and bone-chilling cold air drilled into their bodies. Shi Mu was shivering in the quivering cold. He thought of activating the real qi within his body in order to resist the bitter cold. Then, a wisp of real qi suddenly emerged from his lower abdomen, and spread in his entire body. The cold was repelled from the outer surface of his body as a result. He no longer felt the cold as a result of this. However, Shi Mu was startled by this since it had happened on its own. He then realized that it must have been the art of breeding a strong evil ape that had gathered his real qi, and had resisted the powerful cold. He felt relaxed in his heart. He then swept his vision all over the place. He found that the walls of the cave were covered in thick layers of ice. Several torches had been illuminated, they reflected a sparkling and translucent pure light against the icy walls. They continued to move forward, and took 7 or 8 turns in the cave under the guidance of Mo Lang and Jin Huang. They finally arrived in a huge and spacious crystal palace after a quarter of an hour. The space was several hundred meters in dimension, and was made up of thick layers of ice. Ice cubes of every form and shape were scattered everywhere. Several huge ice chunks were bundled inside the central space. There was a tall silver fruit tree, it looked extremely eye-catching. There was a cold and deep pond in front of the tree, it was 200 or 300 feet in perimeter. It was covered in a thick layer of ice. There were no leaves on the silver tree, just bare branches. 5 green fruits were hanging from those branches, they were as big as a fist. They were emitting a mighty light, and didn't seem to be ordinary. Shi Mu's heart thumped as he looked at the dark green fruits. But, he narrowed his eyes as he saw the cold and tranquil pond in front of the tree. Princess Huo Wu and the others stopped in their tracks as they saw the pond. Mo Lang and Jin Huang exposed fiery look in their eyes as they saw the tree. Princess Huo Wu still remained aloof. But, she didn't try to conceal her desire for the fruit. "I'll go over, and take a look," Mo Lang withdrew his gaze, and whispered. He then took out a big green axe from his back, and started to move forward with an alert look on his face. Mo Lang was extremely tall and strong. However, he took each and every step very gracefully. He then stopped and looked around. He started to move again once he was sure that there was nothing unusual. The entire place was silent. Shi Mu wouldn't have anticipated the presence of a Houtian summit-level ice crystal scorpion guarding the tree if Mo Lang hadn't mentioned it. Mo Lang arrived at a distance of around 100 meters from the cold pond after a while. He hid behind a huge ice block, and started to look in every direction. He finally looked at the cold pond. He muttered something to himself, and then raised a hand with a serious expression on his face. He remained behind the ice block as he made a strange gesture with his hands. Shi Mu and the other 2 people started to walk quietly towards Mo Lang's direction as they saw this. They finally arrived behind the ice block. Then, all of them took out black triangular flags made up of animal skin from their bosoms. A vivid and lifelike spider was drawn in the center of each of the flags. It seemed to be extremely fierce. The ice crystal scorpion must be inside this cold pond. I'll draw this scorpion out. Then, you guys must trap him. After that, I'll take the green frost fruit, and we'll immediately recede from the way that we've come from, Mo Lang spoke in a soft tone. Shi Mu and the other 2 people walked over to the cold pond, and hid behind an ice block. After that, they surrounded the cold pond, and formed a horn-like shape. The 3 people then bit their tongues, and sprayed their blood on the bestial flags in their hands. The white spider and the witch characters on the flag changed into blood red in a flash. It seemed to have come alive as it wriggled slowly. Then, they poured their real qi into the flag. Suddenly, the red spider on the flag sprayed out countless thin and transparent threads. They started to flow and twist together on the surface of the pond. After that, they took the shape of a huge and transparent web. The threads flashed, and disappeared after a short while. Mo Lang nodded as he saw this. A green light welled up from his body as his figure flashed. He then rushed towards the silver fruit tree. He reached under the tree in a few breaths' time. After that, he bounced and rose towards the silver fruit tree like a monkey. He landed on a thick and old branch after several attempts. A mighty light flashed from the green frost fruit that was hanging from a nearby branch. Mo Lang swept a glance at the cold pond, and took a deep breath. He then moved a few steps forward on the branch. After that, he carefully grasped the green frost fruit. He then gently pulled it down. Shi Mu and the other two people started to breathe faster as they saw this. Then, they stared at the cold pond. Suddenly, something happened. A splashing sound was heard. Suddenly, an ordinary-looking but big ice chunk exploded and split open. This chunk of ice was located behind the silver fruit tree. Then, a crystallized white light flashed from the crushed ice, and targeted Mo Lang. The crystal white light swayed past Mo Lang's body with a great speed. Shi Mu could see it clearly. The sparkling light had turned out to be a huge tail hook. Mo Lang's pupil shrank. There wasn't enough time to dodge it. Suddenly, a layer of green light resonated from the big axe in his hand, and rolled out green axe shadows. It then forged ahead towards the huge tail hook. Bang! A loud sound was heard. The axe shadows scattered and dispersed. The huge green axe in Mo Lang's hand was sent flying. His body then met with a powerful jolt. And, he too was sent flying upside down. His face was filled with colors of shock. Suddenly, a white fog appeared on the surface of the biggest block among the huge ice chunks. A glittering light flashed from within the fog. Then, a 50 or 60 feet long gigantic scorpion came out of it. Its entire body was translucent and sparkly. It looked like an ice sculpture of a scorpion. It was the ice crystal scorpion. The figure of this ice crystal scorpion jumped out. It then opened its mouth, and a big current of white cold air rolled out from it. Xian Tian. Mo Lang's body got shrouded in the cold air before he could complete his sentence. Then, the speed of his raised arm slowed down, and the green skin of his body became dark. A layer of white frost appeared in front of his eyes. The dense and cold air had turned him into an ice man. Then, he fell down. The ice crystal scorpion whistled, and shook its tail hook. White and translucent sparkling light came out of it. Bang! A crisp sound echoed. Mo Lang's body hadn't only fallen to the ground, it had also been split into pieces. He had died before he had been able to consume the green frost fruit. But, the fruit was still clenched in the palm of his destroyed arm. Fortunately, it had fallen near the ice chuck where Jin Huang was hiding. All this had happened at the speed of lightning. Mo Lang, the consummate level Houtian totem warrior of the Green Tooth tribe, had died in the blink of an eye. Shi Mu and the other two people couldn't understand when this ice crystal scorpion hidden in the ice chunk had advanced to the Xian Tian level. Its strength had probably reached the Xian Tian level owing to the environment. Suddenly, the ice crystal scorpion jumped up while spinning in the air. A mass of cold air came out at the same time. Chi! Chi! A sneering sound erupted. Then, several fist-sized ice balls were shot out in all directions. A series of slamming sounds echoed loudly. The ice balls were spread in all directions. Then, they started to explode one after another. Suddenly, the figures of three jumped out of three ice chunks almost at the same time. These three individuals had been hiding until now. However, they had been forced to come out because of these explosions. Shi Mu and Princess Huowu started to crush the ice fragments by striking them with the edges of their blades in a continuous manner. They then turned towards the cave's mouth to flee from there. However, Jin Huang's eyes flashed with colors of hesitation. He held the round-edged blade in front of his body to protect himself. Countless blade-ons fluttered in front of him. They broke down the ice fragments, and scattered them everywhere. However, he didn't move back. Instead, he moved forward in a deceiving manner. He then came near Mo Lang's body, and stooped to grab the green frost fruit. Suddenly, a loud sound was heard. And, a mix of ice balls and cold fog started to shade above Jin Huang's head. He didn't have any way to hide anymore. So, he was only left with a tough path to walk on. Jin Huang's face flushed. He clenched his teeth. He then put a finger on the golden feather crest on his head, and started to recite an incantation. A pop sound was heard. The golden feather crest was split open. Small golden stars emerged from the feathers, and shrouded around his body. Soon, the shape of a virtual shadow of a golden monster bird was formed, and wrapped itself around his body. He then transformed into shadows of golden light, and rushed towards the exit to flee. The golden light soon took over, and swayed past Shi Mu and Princess Huowu's head. "It's not good." Princess Huowu became frightened and angry as she saw this. It seemed that Jin Huang had seized the fruit by using this secret technique. He now intended to leave Shi Mu and the princess as sacrificial victims. Shi Mu and Princess Huowu were running side by side. Both of them were less than 500 feet away from the cave's mouth. Their complexions changed as they saw the golden light sweeping over their heads. Suddenly, Shi Mu grabbed Princess Huowu by her waist. Princess Huowu became frightened, and was about to say something. But, Shi Mu activated the black animal skin charm paper in his hand before she could say anything. A pair of black and misty wing shadows started to unfold behind him. Then, both of them started to fly in the air. Suddenly, a sneering sound echoed. A large volley of ice thorns flashed past the two of them. This volley of ice thorns had nearly struck them. A series of crashing sounds resounded everywhere. A radius of 100 feet around their previous location on the ground was now densely covered with ice thorns. In fact, the two of them wouldn't have survived if they had been on the ground. Chapter 164. Everyone goes about their own business. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Princess Huowu felt an extreme fear in her heart as she looked down from midair. Suddenly, she realized that her waist had been tightly held by Shi Mu's arm. It felt to her as sturdy as a piece of iron. She blushed and her cheeks turned red as Shi Mu's manly smell entered her nose. "Jin Huang's in trouble," Shi Mu's eyebrows creased as he said in a cold tone. What's the matter?" Princess Huowu was startled. She had seen Jin Huang transforming into a streak of golden light, and rushed towards the entrance of the cave at an incredible speed. Moreover, he was less than 100 feet away from the cave's mouth. But then, she swept her gaze once again. She noticed that the ice crystal scorpion wasn't pursuing him. In fact, it stood motionless. This seemed a little bewildering to her. Bang! Suddenly, a piece of massive ice crystal exploded near the entrance of the cave. Then, the ice scorpion darted towards the entrance like an arrow amidst the ice fog that had spread everywhere. It blocked the opening of the cave with its body. The cold air that had been curling up from its body appeared a little weaker now. But, its feeble body gradually turned into cold ice. "Be careful of the ice." Princess Huowu's complexion turned a little unsightly. Shi Mu's complexion also darkened. He tightened his grip on his black blade. Suddenly, the ice scorpion sprang up high into the air by supporting its two rows of short legs on the ground. It then raised a pair of its gigantic pincers in the air, and pressed them from either sides with a mighty force. A huge pair of translucent ice pincers flashed towards Jin Huang while carrying a burst of cold air with them. They then grabbed Jin Huang along with his golden light. Suddenly, the golden light around Jin Huang's body stopped glowing. It had been forcibly stopped once he was caught. He looked angry and startled at the same time. The circular blade in his hand radiated a bright golden light as he snorted coldly. He then pounded his blade ferociously to deal with the ice pincers. Clang! 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 A series of loud metal clanging sounds rang out in the air. The rotating golden light collided with the ice pincers. Hiss! The ice crumbs dispersed in all directions with a loud grating sound. The golden light resisted the pincers for a short while. Then, it also collapsed. Jin Wang's eyes sharpened. Suddenly, the black magic characters carved on the surface of his round blade started to flicker, as if they were alive. Bang! A loud rumble was heard. The golden blade transformed into a huge layer of golden light, and got ruptured. Then, the scorpion's giant pincers transformed into a cloud of mist, and vanished into thin air like snow vanishes under the bright sun. Zi! Zi! A burst of sounds spread in the air. The scorpion had spouted out a vast stretch of ice flames from its mouth. It darted towards Jin Huang. Jin Wang's body flashed as he tried to escape. But, the ice flames were extremely fast. His feet was grabbed and frozen into ice before he could understand what was happening. His body crashed to the ground. Ping! A sharp sound was issued as his legs from below the knees crumbled into bits of frozen ice. Ah! Jin Huang issued a blood-curdling screech as he collapsed to the ground. An expression of helplessness appeared on his face as he saw the ice scorpion approach him. A trace of hesitation flashed across Princess Huowu's face as she saw this from midair. She then fished out a couple of silver charms from her bosom. They were glowing. She passed one of them to Shi Mu and spoke in a hurried tone, "This is the last trump card that I have. This was bestowed on me by my master. This is called the teleportation charm. It can teleport a person dozens of miles away in an instant. I used one of these the day I was attacked in the wasteland. Now, I'm left with only 2 of them. If it teleports you to another beast's lair, then you can look for some good fortune there." Then, the princess stuck the charm on her body before Shi Mu could say anything. After that, a faint silver radiance enveloped her entire body. Suddenly, a faint silver radiance flashed before Shi Mu's eyes. Princess Huowu disappeared into the silver light the next moment. Shi Mu smelt the sweet fragrance that was still lingering on his arm. He tightly clenched the silver charm, but didn't stimulate it at once. Instead, he urged the gloomy black wings that were fluttering behind his back. He then turned around, and rushed towards the silver fruit tree. The ice scorpion issued an intense whinny sound in rage. It seemed to have discerned Shi Mu's intentions. Then, it struck its gaze at Jin Huang. The man was near the place where it stood. His feet were drenched in blood. The scorpion then pondered for a moment. After that, it moved its stinger, and started to crawl towards Jin Huang in a menacing manner. Shi Mu's body was shrouded by a thin layer of golden light. He was getting closer to the silver fruit tree. But, he was also aware of the situation behind him. Meanwhile, the shadow of his black wings grew faint, so much so that it was on the brink of becoming transparent. Shi Mu heard a heart-rending cry. He was less than 3 meters away from the tree now. Suddenly, another ice boulder ruptured near the freezing cold pond. The ice scorpion then dashed towards Shi Mu while carrying a burst of strong gale along with it. Then, a translucent shadow of ice pincers pounced on Shi Mu with a strong cold gale. Shi Mu clenched his teeth, and decided to ignore the approaching attack. He then grasped 3 green frost fruits, and turned around. The black blade in his hand radiated a magnificent red light. Then, 13 fiery red blade shadows fled from his blade, and collided with the massive shadow of the ice pincers, as if a fiery snake was making threatening gestures in the air. A series of crackling sounds was heard. The 13 fiery red blade shadows were rooted and dispersed as they clashed with the pincers. However, they succeeded to resist the gigantic pincers of the scorpion for a little while. Shi Mu seized this opportunity. He turned around, and grabbed the last green frost fruit. A group of dazzling silver lights sprouted up at the same time, and engulfed his entire body. Bang! A crashing sound was heard. The giant frozen pincers fell on the silver radiance around Shi Mu's body. This caused a sudden burst of gold, silver, and white lights. Shi Mu's silhouette became fuzzy at the same time. Then, it started to quiver. After that, he vanished into thin air. A burst of silver light appeared on a low-lying land in the mountainous area of the central region. Shi Mu's figure tumbled down from inside the light. He rolled on the ground for some time. Shi Mu's face was contorted in agony. But, he quickly crawled up to his feet, and regained his composure. Shi Mu hadn't been able to resist the last strike of the ice scorpion in its entirety. His body had felt nearly half of the formidable strength of the scorpion's pincers before his teleportation. Fortunately, he had been able to resist most of it with his 13 series of Gale Force Blade Art. Moreover, he was under the protection of the golden armor charm at that time. The yin qi inside his body had also played an important role. It had resisted most of the effect of the fierce and cold air that the scorpion had carried along with itself. Therefore, Shi Mu hadn't been severely injured by the scorpion's attack. Shi Mu's heart was overwhelmed with joy as he looked at the 4 green frost fruits. He noticed that his present surroundings were entirely different. There wasn't the slightest trace of ice-laden mountains around him. Moreover, this place seemed to be a peaceful land since there was no trace of ominous beasts in its periphery. However, Shi Mu had no idea where the princess had been teleported to. He let out a soft sigh. He then took out a rejuvenation charm, and pasted it on the wound that he had received on his back. Shi Mu arrived at the top of a huge mountain after a quarter of an hour. He was holding the animal hide map in his hand. This map was substantially different from the original crude map that Shi Mu had received. Also, many new places could be seen on this map. However, this map wasn't a different one. Shi Mu had updated the old map by adding several new places on it since he had secretly memorized these new marks from Mo Lang's map. Shi Mu had been practicing the moon-swallowing art for a long time. Therefore, his memory had improved along with the extreme enhancement of his spiritual power. He was very close to achieving a retentive memory. Shi Mu compared the surrounding terrain with his map, and identified his current location. He was currently in the northwestern direction, and was around 45 kilometers away from the snow mountain. His current location was also close to the lair of a multiple-headed python. Shi Mu looked at the map carefully. He then descended from the mountain, and started to proceed towards the spot. A dense forest was located almost 35 kilometers further in the western direction from the mountain peak. Whiz! 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 Dozens of black round nuts were shot toward a running girl, as if several arrows were being shot. This girl was none other than Princess Huo Wu. Her face was raging with fury. Her entire body was wrapped in a layer of a faint green light shield. She was swiftly shuttling her way through the dense woods. It seemed as if she was flying rapidly in the woods. Crackles. Snaps. These nuts were harder than stones. These nuts crushed the trees' barks every time they hit them. In fact, they even uprooted the smaller trees. These black nuts were several in number. They possessed a great force. But, none of them had been able to hit the princess so far. Princess Huo Wu's figure was shuttling through the woods in an extremely nimble manner like a cotton wad floating in the wind. She continued to evade the numerous attacks throughout the way in this manner. 20 or more grey apes were jumping crazily from tree to tree behind the princess in her pursuit. Each of these apes possessed the strength of a Houtian middle-stage beast. All of them were clenching several black nuts in their hands. And, they kept on throwing them at the princess from time to time. The apes and the princess covered a distance of hundreds of feet in this manner. Suddenly, a hairy ape issued a sonorous and shrill scream. The entire body of this ape was covered in a layer of black fur. The other apes stopped moving as soon as they heard the scream. Some of them neighed towards princess in an angry manner. But then, they started to go back from the route that they had come under the leadership of the black fur ape. Princess Huo Wu continued to run for some more time. She finally stopped as she noticed that the apes weren't pursuing her anymore. She heaved a sigh of relief. However, her elegant eyebrows were slightly wrinkled. She noticed that there were several bruises on her body, even her clothes had been smudged red. Unfortunately, she had been transported to a den of grey apes. These apes were considered to be strong, ominous beasts. She had quickly induced that the situation wasn't propitious. Therefore, she had deployed a body-lifting charm in order to escape from the converging attacks of the apes. But, she hadn't been able to escape their attacks in their entirety. She had received some minor injuries as a result. The princess took out a green charm, and stuck it on her body. A green light flashed after a moment. Then, several wounds on the princess' body started to heal at a rapid rate. In fact, the wounds that could be seen by the naked eye were also healed. Princess Huowu took a deep breath. Then, her figure flashed as she leapt towards a certain direction. There was a mountain valley in the central region. A stream of limpid water meandered through the canyon in the valley. The environment of the mountain valley was quiet and beautiful. There were green hills and clear water. It was indeed a conspicuous landscape to behold. The entire mountain valley was crowded with various kinds of trees and bushes. Several gigantic and broken statues stood upright on the mountain. These statues appeared half human and half beasts. Shi Mu would have recognized these statues right away if he had been there. These statues bore a resemblance to the statue that he had seen earlier. A tall and a short figure could be seen advancing towards this place at a remarkable speed. They were following the stream to reach the place. Then, they stopped near the statues scattered in the valley. These two people were Saintess Xiangzhu and her companion Suogu, the man with a fish tail. It should be here. Xiangzhu looked at the blue crystal ball in her hand. The pointer inside the crystal ball was quivering and pointing towards the depths of the valley. She then kept the crystal ball safely. Her vision got pulled towards the giant statues scattered in the valley. Her face beamed with excitement. She started to walk towards the mountain valley. Suddenly, a thick streak of white light bolted out of the valley, and pounced on Xiangzhu at a lightning speed. Saintess, watch out! Suogu's complexion changed. He was only a few steps behind the Saintess. He knew that he didn't have enough time to protect the Saintess from the shadow. Therefore, he shouted loudly in order to alert her. Xiangzhu hadn't expected this attack. But, she responded quickly. She pointed her foot on the ground, and took a quick rotation. She then moved several feet towards a side like a cotton wad flying in the wind. Fortunately, she was successful in escaping the white light. However, the white light also took a quick rotation, almost as if it was alive. Then, it leapt towards her once again. Bang! A dull thumping sound was heard. Suogu had caught up with the white shadow by now. The trident in his hand emitted a blue light, and this light collided with that strange white light. The white light possessed a mighty power, and forced Suogu to take a step backwards. His complexion turned pale. He was still holding the trident in his hand. But, his hands felt numb from the impact of the collision. Suogu needed a moment to respite. But, he was shocked to find that his trident couldn't move. It had got stuck in the white light. His face turned ghastly pale. He stared at the white light. He had finally realized what it was. It turned out to be intertwined strands of a spider's silk. These strands were as thick as a human arm. Chapter 165, Taking a Risk Out of Desperation. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The white spider silk had missed its target. But, it retreated and wrapped itself around the trident that Suogu was about to pull towards him. However, a sudden flash of blue light fell on the spider silk at an alarming speed before the trident could. Snap! The spider's silk was severed with a crackling sound. Xiangzhu stood near the scene of the encounter. She held a multicolored coral in her left hand, and a short and curved snake-shaped blue blade in her right. The curved blade was emitting a faint blue radiance. It seemed to be a valuable treasure. It was evident that the spider's silk had been severed by this curved blade with blue luminescence. The remaining spider silk flashed and submerged in the valley. Bang! A loud sound was heard from the woods. A huge shadow jumped out of the woods at the same time. It was a giant spider. It was as tall as a human. Its entire body was covered in large and thick incisive bristles. Moreover, there were black and yellow markings on its back like a tiger's stripes. 2 venomous fangs protruded from the spider's mouth. Those fangs were as sharp as a set of daggers. Moreover, they were suffused with a green gleam. The spider had 4 eyes, all of them were different in size. Its eyes emitted an ice-cold brightness as they stared at Xiangzhu and Suogu. The tiger-striped demon spider. Suogu's complexion changed. He called out in alarm. Look at its appearance, it seems to have ascended to the Xiantian realm only recently. I'm now more determined that we have to obtain the things that are in this valley, Xiangzhu said lightly. The snake-shaped short dagger and the multicolored coral in her hand radiated bright rays of light at the same time. At some other place in the central region, 5 barbarian warriors stood in a circle. All of them were Hotian consummate stage warriors. A huge blood-red tiger stood in the center. It seemed as if it had been surrounded by these people. The huge tiger was a Xiantian-level ominous beast. But, one of its hind legs had been pierced by a bone spear. This injury had left the tiger with a pronounced limp. These 5 people belonged to a vicious barbarian tribe. Their movements were quite flexible. Moreover, their coordination with each other seemed accomplished. They had surrounded the formidable tiger from all sides. The tiger was trying to burst out of the circle repeatedly. But, it was blocked by the 5 people every time it attempted to flee, no matter how hard it tried. The corpses of 4 or 5 barbarians lay on the ground at a nearby place. Blood was still flowing out of these corpses. These barbarians seemed to have received a very painful death. Everyone was eager to set foot in the central region, whether it was the vicious barbarians, the peaceful barbarians, or the sea race. There was only one criterion to enter into the central region: they needed to know if they were powerful enough to try their luck. But, the central region was piled up with numerous dangers. Many people succeeded in hunting all kinds of ominous beasts. However, many people fell prey to these ominous beasts, and got devoured by them. A dozens of feet high cave could be seen underneath a black mountain peak in the central region. It was extremely dark and moist. Green moss grew over the ground and walls of the cave. A silhouette hid behind a large rock beside the cave. He stuck his head out, and glanced inside the cave. It was Shi Mu. He didn't seem to be in a good condition. His eyes were tinged with a thick layer of blood, and his complexion looked extremely frail and pale. 3 to 4 days had already passed ever since he had entered the central region. And, only 2 out of the 10 allotted days were left for the competition. He had constantly been on the search for the traces of the multi-headed python with the help of the map that he had received from Min-Tu. He had explored a number of places. But, he had ended up empty-handed. This place was the last place on his search list. Shi Mu looked at the cave. His tightly furrowed eyebrows slightly loosened up, and his eyes lit up brightly. This cave looked like the dwelling place of a snake, sort of an ominous beast. Moreover, a faint pungent smell was coming from inside the cave. The gleam in Shi Mu's eyes grew brighter. But, he didn't burst into the cave impulsively. He sucked in a long and deep breath, and tried to calm his mind. After that, he took a step forward, and walked inside the cave. He was walking very cautiously so that his footsteps didn't produce the slightest sound. The walls inside the cave seemed to be made up of a kind of smooth and glossy black rock. Shi Mu's hopes rose and his face sparkled with happiness as he saw the insides of the cave. It started to get darker once he had walked almost 100 feet inside the cave. It soon turned completely dark. However, Shi Mu's eyesight was extremely powerful. So, the darkness didn't have any effect on him. The cave's path was extremely complicated due to its endless twists and turns. It was stretched downwards. Shi Mu continued to walk downwards for a quarter of an hour. But, there was no sign of any end. However, his face didn't reveal an impatient look. He held the hilt of his black blade in one hand. His other hand had slipped into his pocket, and held a few magic charms. The cave turned towards one side, and came to an end. A very spacious area could be seen there. Shi Mu stuck close to the cave's wall, and peeked to look inside. The large and open area seemed to be a natural formation. A huge stalactite also hung from the ceiling. The air inside was much heavier and humid than outside. Water droplets kept on falling from the ceiling in a continuous manner. There was a medium-sized puddle in the cavern. The puddle sent out a light dong sound whenever a water droplet fell into it. Suddenly, Shi Mu's expression changed, his face started to gleam with an ecstatic look. He saw a gigantic black python inside a hollow nest beside the pool. It was more than 100 feet long. The scales on the python's body had a flame-like red pattern on them. Shi Mu was overwhelmed with exhilaration, so much so that his body started to quiver. The flame-like pattern was another sign of a multiple-headed python. But, his expression changed as his eyes fell on the black python's head. He saw that it was a gigantic multiple-headed python. It had 3 massive heads. But, all of its eyes were closed. Its bulky body was rising and falling in a continuous manner. Shi Mu broke out in a cold sweat. Soon, a thin layer of sweat appeared on his body. A hesitant look was revealed on his face. He began to retreat by following the route that he had come from. He finally stepped out of the cave, and rushed to the forest that was almost 100 feet away from the cave. He heaved a sigh of relief. But then, his eyebrows tightened. He had come across several multiple-headed pythons so far. But, this python was so huge that it had far surpassed his expectations. It was the 3-headed vicious python that possessed the strength of the Xian-Tian middle-stage beast. Shi Mu could barely deal with a Xian-Tian primary-stage double-headed python with his current level of strength, despite the variety of hidden means he had at his disposal. But, there was no way that he could confront a triple-headed python that was a Xian-Tian middle-stage beast. His body was still trembling. He had been very lucky that the 3-headed python was in a deep slumber. Otherwise, it would have been hard to say if could have gotten out of the cave alive. He looked extremely perplexed. He was weighing the pros and cons of confronting this python. The chances of his success were on the lower side if he chose to fight. In fact, he might end up losing his life. Was he supposed to give up? He had limited time in his hands. Moreover, it would take a great deal of time to look for another multi-headed python. Also, it was almost impossible to find any other python based on the information that he had gathered. Princess Huowu had promised him that she would ask an Earth-grade powerhouse to foist a seal on him. But, the totem on his body was now on the brink of an eruption. So, it was impossible to return to the Union for help. Moreover, there was no guarantee that the Union would provide an Earth-grade powerhouse to sort out this issue even if he returned. He was staying in the Holy Mountains from the past few days. So, he had gained a lot of information about the totem curse and the matters related to it from Min Tu. The seal imposed by the Earth-grade powerhouse could suppress the strength of the totem curse as per Min Tu's knowledge. However, most of his real chi and spiritual power would also get sealed up along with the curse. So, he'll have to lead the life of an ordinary person even if he survived. No. The trace of hesitation that had been flickering in Shi Mu's eyes gradually receded. An unprecedented firmness bloomed across his face. He had promised his mother that he would grow up to be a true martial warrior. He couldn't let her down or disappoint her. Moreover, he had given his word to the demon witch of the Tianyin sect that he would become a strong Xian-Tian warrior before he reached the age of 30. Then, he would visit the Tianyin sect to look for her. So, he couldn't resign to the fate at this point of time. A flash of understanding appeared on Shi Mu's face. He quickly explored the forest in the vicinity of the cave. Then, he stood in a spacious place for some time. Here it is, he murmured to himself. He then took out a small package from his clothes, and opened it. There were some magic charms, spiritual stones, and other stuff inside the package. Shi Mu had prepared these things beforehand so that he could hunt a multiple-headed python in a smooth manner. He had prepared these things very meticulously. But now, he had to deal with a three-headed python that was already at a Xian-Tian middle stage. So, it was unclear if these objects would play a substantial role at this juncture or not. Shi Mu bent down and brushed away the fallen leaves from the ground. Then, he started to draw a formula. He gradually sketched out a magic spell with complex formulas on the ground. He had finished drawing the formula after an hour. His forehead was slightly perspiring. He didn't know the appropriate method to deal with the three-headed python. He could only rely on some magic spells, strategies, and traps. He drew a plan so that he could lure out the python at that place. Then, he would use these external forces, and would try to find some favorable chances to defeat the enemy. He found a shady place, and sat down on the ground with his legs crossed. He then fished out a pill from his clothes, and started to meditate. Shi Mu had restored his magic powers to the optimum by the time the sun slid down the western mountain. He then stood up, and went to the magic spell that he had drawn as a trap. He examined it carefully. After that, he started to advance towards the cave. He finally stopped near the cave's entrance. The sky had become completely dark by that time. A bright round moon hung in the sky with countless sparkling stars. He took out a body-lifting charm, and pasted it on his body. This charm was drawn on a patch of animal skin. A layer of blue light bubbled up, and enveloped his entire body. He felt that his body had become very light. He was now all set to enter the cave. Suddenly, he was startled. The image of Yan Luo the human skeleton appeared in his mind without any reason. He had summoned it a long time ago. But, he had almost forgotten about it. He hesitated for a moment. Then, he started to recite an incantation. A cloud of black qi emerged on the ground in front of him. Then, a slender and short skeleton emerged before him. It was shorter than it used to be. The skeleton was clad in a dilapidated bone armor. It held a long bone blade in its hand. The blade was half the height of its own body. A faint green soul flame was sparkling in its eyes. Shi Mu opened his eyes wide, and stared at the skeleton. The skeleton looked vigorous and powerful, like a true warrior. Was it really the same tattered, frail, and small skeleton that he had met before? He circled around Yan Luo in an inquisitive manner. His eyes were tinged with a surprised expression. He then stimulated his spiritual power, and swept it over Yan Luo. He was delighted to perceive that Yan Luo's strength had reached the primary stage of the Houtian realm. I haven't seen this skeleton for a long time. But, I didn't expect that its strength would rise so alarmingly in these years. Shi Mu was profoundly amazed in his heart. Yan Luo's strength was barely equivalent to the 7th or 8th layer of bone tempering when Shi Mu had summoned it for the first time. It had been extremely sluggish back then. Moreover, it had no fighting ability. In fact, it was far below an ordinary warrior at that time. Yan Luo's bones were grayish-white in color. Its right arm and head were different from the other bones in its body. This rendered a translucent and sparkling sensation to its persona. Yan Luo looked blankly. Its eyes slowly moved and looked at Shi Mu. Shi Mu and the skeleton gazed at each other for a moment. Then, Shi Mu wrinkled his eyebrows. The green soul flame in Yan Luo's eyes revealed a faint hint of fluctuation. It seemed as if it was emotional for some reason. But, this feeling faded away when Shi Mu examined it more closely. Chapter 166, Luring into the Trap. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Is it possible that skeletons also have emotions? Suddenly, a thought crossed Shi Mu's mind. But, he shook his head, and pushed this strange thought out of his mind. He then focused his mind on the primary matter. There's a fierce ominous beast in the depths of this cave. You have to go inside and lure it out, Shi Mu ordered Yan Luo. The spirit mark unleashed its power. A wave of inexplicable force tumbled down on Yan Luo's body. It urged it to step forward, and move towards the depths of the cave. Yan Luo started to walk with heavy and sonorous footsteps. Walk softly with light footsteps, Shi Mu said hastily. Yan Luo had raised its right leg, and was about to put it down forcefully. But, it stopped as soon as it heard Shi Mu's words. Its leg remained hung in the air. The faint green soul flame in its eye sockets flickered a few times. Then, its right foot fell down slowly. After that, it slowly lifted its left leg. Yan Luo's footsteps became extremely soft. In fact, it started to walk on tiptoes. Shi Mu found this funny. Its footsteps had become quiet and soundless now. Shi Mu was dumbstruck as he saw its sluggish movement. But, he didn't dare to keep high hopes in Yan Luo. Yan Luo had already surpassed his expectations by following his orders and walking soundlessly. Shi Mu heaved a sigh of relief. Then, his figure flashed, and quietly vanished into the woods. Yan Luo's figure entered deeper into the cave. It seemed to have become accustomed to walking with light footsteps. Now, its footsteps seemed much more sensitive than before. Suddenly, the soul flame within its eye sockets flickered as it arrived close to the spacious place. A dangerous aura prevailed in the depths of the cave. This made Yan Luo reluctant to approach any closer. However, it couldn't disobey Shi Mu's order because of the power of the contract. Therefore, it continued to walk forward. However, the brightness of Yan Luo's soul flame had weakened a little. Then, its footsteps became lighter, and the aura around its body started to recede. It soon arrived at the deepest place in the cave. The three-headed python finally floated into its line of sight. Yan Luo had instinctively restrained its aura to conceal its presence. But, its technique couldn't be compared with that of Shi Mu's. Suddenly, the python's coiled body moved. The 6 eyes on top of its 3 giant heads opened. It then raised its heads ferociously. The python's giant heads turned, and its 6 piercing cold eyes fell on Yan Luo. Yan Luo's body was initially sluggish. But then, the soul flame in its eye sockets brightened up. It turned around, and fled towards the cave's exit without any hesitation. Its movement seemed inexplicably agile. Suddenly, a black beam of light flashed through the air like lightning, and bombarded the place where Yan Luo had stood a moment ago. Bang! The fragments of crushed rocks scattered everywhere. A 10 feet deep pit got formed in the ground. A pungent and unpleasant smell diffused through the air in the surrounding area. The black beam of light had been emitted out by the left head of the python. It issued a hoarse hissing howl. A fit of fury could be seen blazing in its cold eyes. It wouldn't have exhibited such anger if someone had disturbed its sleep before. However, it had recently become pregnant. Therefore, it needed a long and deep sleep, so that it could give birth to a healthy offspring. Someone had dared to invade its territory at such a crucial time, and had disturbed its much-needed sleep. This was an unforgivable offense. The python's body began to sway left and right like a pendulum. Suddenly, it transformed into a shadow, and darted after Yan Luo. Yan Luo had reached the passageway by now. It was running at an alarming speed. However, this astonishing speed was nothing in front of the python's. Its body swooped down towards the passageway. It then shrank its body, and darted forward at a lightning speed. It looked like an arrow departing from a bowstring. It crossed dozens of feet in an instant, and caught up with the skeleton. The python's right head opened its mouth, and pounded its venomous fangs down. It intended to crush the skeleton into 2 pieces. However, Yan Luo's body became fuzzy, and transformed into a silver afterimage. Then, it appeared several feet away from its original position. It had been successful in evading the python's dangerous bite. Bang! The python hadn't anticipated this situation. It couldn't stop the momentum of its head, and heavily knocked against the cave's wall. It seemed as if the entire cave had been shaken up by the impact. Countless fragments of rocks dispersed in all directions. Yan Luo didn't turn back even though it had heard the huge rumbling sound. But, the soul flame in its eye sockets started to tremble, as if it was aghast. It then quickened its pace a little. Yan Luo had reached near the cave's exit by the time the python raised its head again. The python issued a furious hiss from its mouth. It started to blaze with rage. It then dashed towards the skeleton. Its right head opened its mouth at the same time, and spouted out a thick beam of black light. After that, it flashed and arrived behind Yan Luo. The soul flame in Yan Luo's eyes flickered again. Then, its body became fuzzy. Its stature flashed outside the cave while trailing a string of silver after-images behind. A loud rumbling sound rang out. The mountain rocks shattered and scattered all around. Yan Luo burst out of the cave with twice of its previous speed. The faint green soul flame in its eye sockets had become dimmer. But, it didn't dare to stop even for a second. It continued to run towards the forest where Shi Mu had laid out the trap. The python plunged into a blazing wrath due to its 2 consecutive failures. This python was considered to be the overlord of the area that fell within the radius of dozens of kilometers around the cave. How could it miss its attacks twice while dealing with a trivial thing that was barely at the Houtian primary stage? Bang! A loud sound was heard once again. The crushed rocks fluttered around as the python's head bumped into the cave's entrance. A huge hole was blasted open at that place. The python's 100-feet-long body pounced and rushed outside the cave. A tree in the forest was laden with luxuriant foliage. Shi Mu crawled up this tree, and stood on one of its branches. Then, he looked into the direction of the cave. His heart was overwhelmed with happiness as he saw Yan Luo being followed by the python. Then, he took out the sky-splitting bow, and a chasing wind arrow. He slipped the arrow on the bow, and pulled it back. A golden gleam swept across his eyes. The python was extremely fast. It had reached a few feet behind Yan Luo in a couple of seconds. Shi Mu saw that the python's enormous body was swaying from side to side like a pendulum. Suddenly, it swatted its sturdy tail on the ground. Then, its gigantic body flew in the air like a thick black arrow, and pounced towards Yan Luo. Its left head opened its mouth at the same time. A black light was flickering inside its mouth. It was about to spout out a black beam of light. Its right head revealed its fang at the same time, as if it was accumulating its strength to make a powerful attack. Yan Luo could feel a fluctuation of ghastly strength surging up violently behind it. But, it didn't have any strength left to accelerate its speed once again. Therefore, it threw its body down in order to avoid the attack. Whiz! An ear-piercing sound was heard. The sound had been issued by the movement of a green arrow. It had flashed from the woods, and darted towards the python. Numerous green charm characters were carved on the surface of the arrow. They had been carved to boost up the arrow's speed. The arrow pierced through the air, and darted towards the python at a lightning speed. It then submerged into the mouth of the python's right head, the same mouth that had been opened to spout the light beam. The python issued a painful screech. Its right head had been struck by the chasing wind arrow. It began to swing wildly. Then, it started to hit its right head on the ground in a continuous manner. Bang! It blew up a huge hole in the ground. Layers of dust flew upward in the air. It also led to a strong wind that swept towards the surrounding area. It carried away everything that it came across on the way. Yan Luo lay prone on the ground. However, it got rolled up by the sudden gust of wind. It flew in the same manner as a willow branch flutters in the air. Then, it fell heavily in the forest. It tumbled over a few times. Then, it became motionless on the ground. It seemed that it had received serious injuries, so much so that it couldn't even budge an inch. Shi Mu was profoundly amazed as he saw this scene. He had seen that Yan Luo was affected by the gale. But, the bone armor on its body didn't seem to have received several damages. However, the current situation was dire. Shi Mu couldn't afford to ponder over this trivial matter at this juncture. So, he placed another chasing wind arrow onto the bowstring. Whiz! A shrill grating sound whistled through the air. The green arrow flashed like a shooting star as it went straight towards the left eye of the python's middle head. The eyes of the python's left head flashed with an ominous glint. Then, its middle head opened its mouth, and spurted a long and slender red shadow like a lightning. The red shadow rolled up around the green arrow. It turned out to be the python's tongue. However, the python had underestimated the might of the chasing wind arrow. Its tongue wrapped itself around the arrow firmly, but it couldn't strike it out of the way. Meanwhile, the green arrow had slightly changed its trajectory as a result of this. Puff! A small part of the arrow submerged in the scales around the mouth of the python's middle head. The python let out a loud hiss as it got wounded. Its piercing cold eyes glinted with fury. It didn't seem to be bothered about Yan Luo anymore. Instead, its body shot towards the direction from the arrow had come like a streak of lightning. Shi Mu suppressed his body's aura, and looked at the python. A hint of happiness glittered in his eyes. He then gently pulled a transparent silk. It was connected with his fingers. The other end of the silk was connected with something else. And, this thing had been placed somewhere else in the forest. The leaves and branches several feet deep into the forest started to flutter. Bang! A faint crashing sound was heard. Then, a shadow flashed indistinctly. Suddenly, the python looked in that direction. Its gigantic body rushed out of the forest, and arrived at the open space. Then, its left head opened its mouth, and emitted a vast stretched beam of black light. But, it wasn't similar to the light beam that it had shot earlier. Instead, it was a bucket-thick black wind that swept towards the branches and leaves in the forest. Then, something strange happened. A beam of yellow light shot out of the forest. It was as thick as a human's arm. It interweaved and condensed in the air, and transformed into a huge circular web. It then quickly shrouded the python's body from all sides. The python crashed heavily to the ground as if its body had collided against a hill. The yellow luminescence of the circular web seemed to possess enough strength to imprison something as powerful as the python. The python was a Xiantian middle-stage beast. However, it had got confined inside the circular web. Shi Mu was still inside the forest. He mumbled something. Then, a yellow disc began to float in front of him. It was as big as a human palm. Several charm characters and patterns were carved on its surface. It released intermittent waves of yellow luminescence as it spun around. Shi Mu was exhilarated as he saw that the python had got trapped. He turned around, and jumped down. Now, the time had arrived to carry out his plan. However, the python's 6 vertical eyes flashed with a sinister look. Its sturdy body began to sway from side to side. Then, a huge cloud of black chi bubbled up on the surface of its body, and started to attack the glittering yellow web cage around it. The yellow luminescence became unsteady, and started to shake. Faint cracks started to burst out on the surface of the yellow web cage. Shi Mu was shocked. He raised his hand, and threw out a blue magic charm. It was the same cold yin charm that he had received from Princess Huowu before they had set foot in this forbidden land. The blue charm flashed in the air, and got broken into many pieces. Then, 7 or 8 streaks of blue tentacles appeared out of thin air. Each of them was dozens of feet long. They extended and merged into the beam of yellow light. After that, they tightly wound around the python's body in order to fetter its movements. The python flew into a rage. Its body began to sway more ferociously. The black chi around its body grew twice as strong as its previous state. It seemed as if the black chi was about to condense. The python then started to attack the blue tentacles and the yellow light beam since they were restricting its movement. An undulating wave of dull thumping sound was heard every time the python hit the web cage. Chapter 167, A Frightening Transformation. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The Cold Yin Charm was a high-ranked magic charm. The three-headed python had attacked it with full force. The blue ice tentacles trembled a little, but remained stable. They didn't show the slightest sign of giving up. A trace of happiness flashed across Shi Mu's eyes. Then, his figure flickered a few times, and appeared on the top of a giant tree near the open space. His entire body was covered in a layer of faint golden light. It was the golden armor magic charm. He looked at the three-headed python. It was struggling in front of him. He then jumped down without any hesitation. After that, he raised his arm, and shot out a fist-sized cloth bag. This cloth bag went flying towards the head of three-headed python. Suddenly, the three-headed python stood up. It then raised one of its heads, and looked towards Shi Mu in a vicious manner. After that, it opened its mouth, and shot out a burst of black light. However, Shi Mu's movement was faster than the python's action. He shot out a fireball like a meteor. This attack hit the cloth bag, while Shi Mu pushed himself backwards with the help of the fireball's retraction force. After that, he turned over and fell down. Bang! A stuffy sound echoed. The cloth bag got shattered into small pieces, and a yellow dust sprinkled in the surrounding area. It emitted an intense odor of sulfur. The three-headed beast got enveloped in it. This yellow dust was a special kind of a powder that he had deployed in order to control the three-headed python before he had stepped foot into this portal of the brave warrior. The three-headed python's body started to transmit a chi sound as the yellow powder came in contact with it. Then, several scales on its head started to disappear. The python had raised its left head. So, the left head had been affected the most. In fact, most of the scales on its left head melted down. The python raised its heads towards the sky, and issued a painful scream since it had received an enormous injury. The black chi on its body looked as if ice had caught fire. Most of it had gotten dissipated as a result. Shi Mu felt a sense of exultation. Suddenly, he hit his foot on the ground, and leapt several feet high. He then turned his hand, and took out the black blade from his back. The magic power surged up violently in his body, and got poured into the black blade. Bang! A loud sound was heard. Raging flames got ignited and wrapped themselves around the blade. Then, the black blade got transformed into a huge flaming blade. Ah! Shi Mu shouted loudly. The flaming blade then got transformed into a scarlet thunder. Suddenly, it struck down. The three-headed python was startled. It couldn't move. It moved its head to and fro since it wanted to dodge the attack. But, its body was bound in the yellow light beam and the tentacles made from the cold yin charm. So, there was limited space for its movement. Therefore, it couldn't dodge the attack. The flaming blade struck the neck of the left head of the python as it had already lost its protective scales. A stream of blood gushed out as the gigantic head of the python got severed from its body. It seemed as if a huge rock had been sent out flying. Blood spurted out and splashed from the severed neck of the three-headed python like a fountain. Shi Mu was close to the python. Dark red blood was dripping from its head in a continuous manner. So, Shi Mu's entire body got covered in its blood. Shi Mu wiped off the blood from his face. The radiance on the flaming blade in his hand got brighter. He then shook his wrist, and the flaming blade got transformed into 13 blade shadows. Then, a fire cloud rose up, and rolled up towards the remaining 2 heads of the python. The python was startled. Its other 2 heads didn't react until the shadows of the flaming blade had arrived really close to them. Then, the python finally reacted. Roar! The remaining 2 heads of the python issued a loud shout like the cry of a dragon. Blood-red lights flashed in the eyes of the middle head of the python. The body of the python became blood-red. It then opened its mouth, and bit one of the blade shadows. The blade shadow turned out to be the real one. It had been firmly bitten by the three-headed python without any fear of the flames. The other 12 blade lights disappeared in a flash. Kaka! A gentle sound was emitted out of the blade. Colors of fright flashed through Shi Mu's eyes. He tried to pull his blade back with all his might, but failed. He had always been very proud of his inhuman strength. But, his strength seemed to be trivial in front of this Xian middle-stage python. It felt as if an ant was trying to shake a tree. Blood lights flashed in the eyes of the right head of the three-headed python. It then turned to bite Shi Mu, but was stopped by the blue tentacles. Suddenly, the middle head rose to throw Shi Mu and the black blade into a distant place. Its entire body had changed into blood-red color by now. The scales that had been destroyed by the effect of the yellow dust started to sprout out at a very fast speed, so much so that it could be seen with naked eyes. Then, several rays of light started to curl up on the surface of its head. Moreover, the black chi that the python's body had been releasing got transformed into a blood fog. The three-headed python issued a bellowing sound. It then opened its mouth and drew in a long breath. Suddenly, its body swelled up. The ice-blue tentacles that had bound its body cracked, and broke open with a loud bang. The vicious python swung its thick tail, and whipped the yellow web around it. The yellow web that was made up of the circular lights broke down with a kaka sound. It then changed into yellow fireflies, and disappeared without a trace. Shi Mu struggled to climb up to his feet more than 100 feet away. His complexion became deathly pale as he saw this. A sad look flashed across his face even though he was a determined person. The python was seriously injured. But, Shi Mu was still no match for it since it had been freed of its bounds. He wanted to flee, but it wasn't easy. The python turned its head, and looked towards Shi Mu. Its eyes shot an ominous glint. Then, its huge body turned, and came over flying at a great speed along with a gust of wind. Shi Mu shivered in his heart. He hit his foot on the ground, and his body was shot out. A blue ray flashed in his hand at the same time. It produced a thumb-sized bead. It was the clam bead that Xiang Zhu had gifted him. 3 blue light dots were suspended inside it. It was emitting faint rays of light. Shi Mu had already examined these blue light dots with the help of his spirit power. 3 water attribute methods had been sealed inside it by Xiang Zhu. Shi Mu raised his hand, and released the blue ray. Then, 3 blue light balls flew out from the body of the pearl. They whirled in the air, and changed into a wide blue light. 3 ice walls got condensed in front of his body, each of them was several feet high, and a foot thick. Shi Mu then turned around, and fled into the distance. The python had broken through the shackles by now. So, Shi Mu had no other choice but to retreat. Bang! 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 The 3 ice walls broke down as a thick snake tail struck them. They got transformed into icicles, and scattered. The 3 ice walls had proved to be useless in stopping the three-headed python. Shi Mu's complexion changed. A thick shadow came whistling before he could turn around. They had brought a gale of fishy smell along. The tail of the three-headed python struck him the next moment. Blood started to spurt out of Shi Mu's mouth. His body flew like a broken sack, and got knocked into the jungle. He hit against several big trees, and was thrown onto the ground. He spurted out a mouthful of blood as he lay on the ground. His left arm appeared to be bent in a strange angle. It wasn't known how many other bones of his body had been broken. His condition wouldn't have been better than that of an ordinary human being if he hadn't practiced the art of breeding heavenly elephants and the art of breeding a strong evil ape. Moreover, his body would have been torn into pieces and his bones would have been crushed if he hadn't made those 3 ice walls. Shi Mu didn't feel much pain. His entire body had almost been paralyzed, and the life force was passing away from his body. After all, I couldn't fulfill my promise. Shi Mu thought as he laughed at himself. Bang! A loud sound echoed. A gust of wind swept away from the forest around him. The three-headed python had chased after him. It saw Shi Mu lying on the ground in a nearly dead state. There was an ominous glint in its eyes, without the slightest of feelings. It opened its big mouth. Thick bundles of red light beams came out of it, and rushed towards Shi Mu. Shi Mu couldn't even move a finger. He helplessly looked on as the red light beams advanced towards him. Suddenly, a shadow appeared in front of Shi Mu's body. It turned out to be Yan Luo. Mild green soul flame flickered in Yan Luo's eyes. It confronted the red light beam, and emitted a bright light without any intention of going back on its stance. It raised its head and issued a quiet shout. A faint layer of white light appeared on its right arm as it issued a punch. Bang! A stuffy sound echoed. The red light beam hit Yan Luo's body, as a sledgehammer hits a beet. It was sent out flying. Half of the skeleton was split open, and broke down into several pieces while still in midair. The remaining half of its body fell inside the jungle in a reckless manner. Most of the red light beam had been blocked by Yan Luo. Only a little of it had bombarded Shi Mu's body. Shi Mu's body had flown, and fell in an open space inside the jungle. His entire body was drenched in blood. The expressions in his eyes had almost disappeared. Shi Mu had nearly lost his consciousness, but he was aware of his state. Everything around him seemed to moving at a fast speed. However, the passage of time felt very slow to him. The three-headed python seemed to be extremely far away. It was coming over to him with the speed of a snail, its vicious sound felt faintly discerning. He saw from the corner of his eye that the moon was covered with black clouds. The clouds gradually seemed to turn around. After a quarter of an hour, the bright moon sprinkled down a faint silver-white sheen, and shone on Shi Mu's body. Bang! A despairing sound was heard in Shi Mu's mind. Suddenly, several broad bean-sized crystal grains broke open, and transformed into a luminous full moon. A portion of the formidable and pure energy bubbled up and entered into Shi Mu's body. Suddenly, Shi Mu's hazy consciousness sobered up. He realized that he had no control over his own body. Buzz! An unusual wave emitted out of Shi Mu's body. Then, countless light dots appeared in the silver moonlight in front of his eyes. After that, the countless light dots arose from the sky, and came down together as a rain of silver light. They merged inside Shi Mu's body. It seemed that a star from the galaxy had fallen into the ocean. This situation looked the same to the situation that he witnessed while he had practiced the moon-swallowing art in his dreams. But, he had never absorbed such a huge essence of moonlight when he had practiced the moon-swallowing art. Countless moonlight essence merged into Shi Mu's body. Then, numerous wounds on his body began to heal at a lightning speed. Even his fractured bones started to fuse on their own. Suddenly, a kind of heat started to flow into the depth of Shi Mu's blood vessels. It rapidly started to circulate in the veins of his entire body. An acute pain flowed in his body along with the heat. He felt as if countless knives were cutting at his veins. Ka! Ka! A layer of silver light emerged from the surface of Shi Mu's body. Several sounds of the cracking of joints rose from countless parts of his body. Then, his body started to swell at a lightning speed. It seemed as if it had been inflated. It swelled up to the height of 70 to 80 meters in the blink of an eye. Several thick and strong lumps of muscles bulged out from his chest, abdomen, and limbs. Countless thick and long silver hair started to sprout on the skin of his entire body, including his face. Sharp and thick white teeth sprouted out of his mouth, and sharp and long claws sprouted out from his fingers. Shi Mu had transformed into a gigantic white ape within a few breaths' time. He then beat his chest with his arms, and issued a long whistle into the sky. Chapter 168, Torture to Death. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu was startled. He couldn't control his own body. He had the same sensations as he used to have while he'd practiced the moon-swallowing art in his dreams. Bang! A loud sound echoed from the forest. Then, a skeleton arm was seen propping upwards. It seemed as if the skeleton was trying to get up by taking support from the ground. After that, a skeleton head was raised. A faint green soul flame was flickering within its eye sockets. It was none other than Yan Luo. Yan Luo's skull and right arm were barely connected to the small part of its breastbone. The other parts of its body had vanished into thin air. Its remaining body glittered with a white light like the luster of gems as the moon shone on it. Suddenly, the faint green soul flame in its eye sockets started to tremble in a violent manner as it saw that Shi Mu had transformed into a white ape. Then, something strange happened. Yan Luo started to move in the direction of the white ape with the help of its remaining hand. It continued to crawl forward in a diligent manner. It was moving slowly. So, it managed to cover a distance of mere 5 feet even after it had crawled for a long time. Meanwhile, the three-headed python was approaching them, even Shi Mu hadn't noticed it approach. The python swooped forward, and stopped several feet away from the ape. Its remaining 2 heads exposed the trace of an indeterminate and scary look. The ape's body was exuding a terrifying aura. It didn't look inferior to that of the python's aura. The ape slowly turned around. Its huge pair of eyes looked like copper bells. An ominous glint flickered across its eyes as it looked at the python. Roar! The ape started to beat its chest with its arms in a furious manner. Its legs stomped on the ground, and its huge body sprang up in the air. It then threw itself towards the python, and grasped its middle head with its sharp claws. The python hadn't anticipated this move. So, it reacted slowly. Its body flickered and tried to move aside in order to dodge the claw. But, it failed. Then, its middle head got caught by the giant claw. 3 deep wounds burst open on its heads. Its hard scales were shattered into pieces. Fresh blood started to gush out from its wounds in torrents. The 2 heads of the python became enraged. The right head bitterly nipped the white ape's arm like a thunderbolt in a counterattack. However, the ape didn't seem to have the slightest trace of fear. Instead, it wielded its furry and sturdy long arms. They started to emit an intermittent burst of claw lights in order to deal with its opponent. The combat between the 2 Xian-Tian-level giant beasts set off a giant wind that proliferated in all directions. Yan Luo had just arrived at the periphery of their battlefield when it was rolled up and thrown away by a strong wind. It tumbled several times in the air, and fell almost 100 feet away. It raised its head as soon as it landed on the ground. Then, it started to crawl in the direction of the ape with the help of its right arm. Meanwhile, the remaining heads of the python were looking in different directions. The ape took advantage of this negligence, and sprang up high in the air. Its claws flashed in midair. A blood-red light flashed. The python tried to dodge the attack. But, the claw lights arrived, and blinded one of the eyes of its middle head. The python's remaining 2 heads issued a blood-curdling screech. Its right head made a vicious counterattack. It opened its mouth, and nipped at the ape's left arm. Suddenly, a wisp of black chi tried to invade the ape's body through the python's buck tooth. But, it stopped before it reached the ape even though the distance between them was non-existent. The python was shocked to notice that its venom didn't have any effect on the ape. It had always worked earlier. However, the python didn't give up. It continued to try to tear apart the ape's left arm. The ape moved into action despite the extreme pain. It curled its right arm into a fist, and shot it towards the python's right head. Bang! A loud sound was issued as the ape tried to rescue its arm from the python's grip. The python's eyes turned bright red. It continued to grasp the ape's left hand in its mouth. It didn't wish to let go of its arm at any cost. Its middle head looked a bit sluggish. But then, an ominous glint flashed across its remaining one eye. After that, it opened its mouth and spouted out a massive amount of foul poisonous fog towards the ape's face. The ape looked unaware of its action. Suddenly, the ape grabbed the python's right head with its right arm, and pierced its razor-sharp claw into its flesh. The python issued a furious roar. Puff, then, a dull sound was heard. The ape pulled the python's right head upwards with extreme force. However, its left arm also got pulled up along with its head. 2 deep wounds burst open on its arms, blood started to gush out of its injuries. The ape's body had been enveloped by the foul poisonous fog by that time. But, the gas seemed to have no effect on its body. The ape let out a crazy roar. It then started to nip at the python's neck with its huge teeth. It dug its teeth deeply into the python's flesh, and started to swallow its blood. The python's remaining two heads issued a burst of agonizing roar. Suddenly, it whirled its body, and wrapped it around the ape's body. It then started to squeeze the ape tightly with its long body. Its middle head started to tear at the ape's body at the same time. However, the ape didn't pay any attention to this attack. A spurt of blood gushed into its huge eyes. Its big mouth continued to bite the python's neck. Shi Mu was stupefied as he saw this scene, so much so that he couldn't even move a muscle. The surrounding forest area had encountered a catastrophic destruction owing to the strong winds that had been set off by the ape and the python's respective attack, so much so that several dozen feet of the forest land had turned into a flat land. Yan Luo attempted to get close to the scene of the war several times. But, it was thrown away by the strong wind every time it tried. It finally realized that it couldn't succeed. So, it gave up. Its right arm propped its skull up. The soul flame within its eye sockets wriggled as it looked towards the white ape. Hiss! Suddenly, a stuffy tearing sound echoed. The ape looked extremely fierce. It was still trying to bite off the python's right head. Its arms continued to exert a huge effort. It finally wrenched apart the python's head. The severed head bumped against the ground heavily like a megalith. The white hair around the ape's mouth were smeared with the python's blood. Its entire body was covered in blood and injuries due to the python's attacks. It looked like an ominous beast from hell. It looked extremely ferocious and dreadful. The python was now in a mortally injured state. The blood fog wrapped around its body gradually thinned down. Its remaining middle head exposed a trace of fear. Whiz! It loosened its grip on the ape, turned around, and dashed towards its cave. It had hardly covered a distance of a few feet when its tail was grabbed by the white ape. Then, its fleeing body was abruptly pulled back. The python was stunned. It became alarmed, and started to sway frantically. It wanted to break itself free. But, the ape's huge hand was like a steel hoop, it couldn't be shaken off easily. The ape raised its head, and issued a loud roar. It pulled the python's body, and pounded it against the ground. Bang! The python's body was severely whipped on the ground. It produced a long and muffled sound. The python's head had been smashed on the ground with such force that it started to feel dizzy. The ape didn't wait for the python to regain its consciousness. It continued to brandish its arms, and smashed the python's body against the ground and the mountain of the surrounding forest. The python's body seemed to be dancing like an illusionary image in the ape's hands. Bang! 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 A string of violent sounds resounded. Several huge pits were created on the ground. The surrounding forest area within the radius of several dozen feet had been razed to the ground. The nearby mountain looked as if had been painted with the python's blood. The python's scales were scattered everywhere. It was an incomparably dreadful scene. The python tried to resist at first. But, its resistance gradually grew weaker. Eventually, its body turned soft, and its breathing stopped. Bang! A loud sound was heard. The ape revolved its arms, and smashed the python's body severely against the mountain wall. A crashing sound was heard as a huge mountain rock collapsed. The python's head sank into the mountain wall, and remained hanging there for a while. The ape bellowed in rage. Its hands loosened the python's tail. Then, it rushed forward like wind. It arrived before the mountain wall in the blink of an eye. After that, it pounded its fist on the python's head, and sank it deeper into the mountain wall. Then, it started to bombard its fists on the middle head of the python. It only came to a stop after it had thrown 20 to 30 punches. The mountain wall shook in a violent manner. Several huge rocks collapsed and scattered in all directions. Some of them even pounded on the ape's body. But, they were bounced back each time they hit its body. They failed to cause any injury to the ape. The python's middle head had been beaten to the pulp by now. Its soft body was hanging lifelessly on the mountain wall. Suddenly, a ray of light flashed across the ape's eyes. It then opened its mouth, and spouted a silver light that submerged into the python's body. Then, a group of black light balls wrapped in silver light pulled out of the python's body. A miniature of a three-headed python also floated out along with it. That group of black light balls struggled to unfetter itself. But, it was swallowed by the ape the next moment. The ape raised its head and issued a loud roar. It then started to drum on its chest in a ferocious manner. Suddenly, its eyes turned expressionless, and its mountain-like huge body toppled backwards. Shi Mu had observed everything like a bystander. He felt that his own living form had slaughtered a Xiantian middle-stage formidable beast. He was terror-stricken to see this bewildering scene. Then, a burst of dizziness took over his soul, and he fell asleep. A violent sound burst out from the ape's body. Then, its huge body rapidly started to shrink. It had transformed into Shi Mu's stature within a few breaths' time. But, his clothes were tattered. He lay on the ground naked and motionless. Everything around him returned to its normal tranquil state. But, the chaotic surroundings could clearly illustrate the intensity of battle that had taken place there some time ago. Suddenly, a rustling sound was heard from afar. It felt as if fallen branches and leaves were being removed. It turned out that a broken skeleton was making that sounds. It was Yan Luo. The soul flame within its eye sockets flickered. It supported its body with its remaining hand, and started to crawl towards Shi Mu. It finally reached Shi Mu's side after a while. Its soul flame trembled as it looked at his face, as if it was pondering over something. It then raised its right arm in a hesitant manner, and touched Shi Mu's face. Then, it retrieved its hand. Yan Luo's eyes were still flickering. It revealed its doubtful state of mind. Then, its soul flame finally got restored to its original state. Yan Luo's eyes twinkled, as if it had decided something. It turned around and looked at a blood-red leather bag that lay nearby. It was the beast's soul bag. It crawled and grabbed the leather bag. Its soul flame trembled as its right hand pulled open the mooring rope of the bag. After that, it opened its mouth and issued a suction. A series of light balls floated out of the bag and flew into its mouth. Yan Luo then swallowed all of them. The color of its soul flame changed from faint green to dark green as the beast souls submerged into its mouth. It also got more solidified. All the souls had been devoured by Yan Luo in a short while. And, the color of its soul flame had seen a drastic transformation. It had become deep green with a shining but faint blue light around it. Yan Luo raised its head, and issued a silent roar. Then, its right arm flew towards a large piece of bone that lay near a collapsed tree. Yan Luo released its black qi, and started to stitch the bone's pieces together. Yan Luo's shattered body parts got restored in a split second. But, several cracks could still be seen all over its body. Yan Luo then turned around, and looked towards unconscious Shi Mu. Suddenly, a black light bubbled up on the surface of its body. Then, its body integrated itself, and disappeared without a trace. The empty beast soul bag fell down beside unconscious Shi Mu. Chapter 169, Earth Shaking. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Bang! An intense earth-shaking sound resounded. Shi Mu's heart quivered and he woke up. He was startled. The surrounding area wasn't the same luxuriant forest. Instead, it was the depth of the dark blue sea water surrounded by vaguely visible thick sea grasses, huge rocks, and seabed peaks. They all were moving up and down under the impact of the sea waves. Moreover, air bubbles were ascending from the sea water in a frequent manner. A huge 9-headed golden flood dragon could be seen in the sea almost hundreds of feet away. It was staring at Shi Mu in a fierce manner. Its snake tail was stirring the sea and setting off huge ripples in a constant manner. Rumbling sound of waves could be heard every now and then. Each of the dragon's head was as large as a loft. But, there was no horn on top of its heads. All of its 9 heads were covered with a layer of golden scales. Each head had a pair of cold eyes, they looked as if they were sticking out of its heads. They were as huge as a city gate. Its pupils were gold in color. But, they looked cold, and emotionless. It had a nearly 1,000 feet long body. Its body was covered with numerous golden scales, each of the scales was as big as a door. However, the scales at a few places were shattered, blood was dripping from them. They seemed to have been shattered by a sharp weapon. The 9 huge heads of the dragon were producing loud roars from time to time. Moreover, its huge body was twisting in the sea in a continuous manner. Few feet long golden talons were visible under its belly. Shi Mu was astounded. Was he no more in the barbarians' forbidden land? Suddenly, he realized something. He was startled as he searched through his consciousness. He remembered that he had been transformed into a huge ape. It had a gigantic body that was silvery white in color. Moreover, a huge white ape also stood in this sea. But, the ape's facial features had changed greatly. Its grayish-black face appeared unusually ferocious. Its 4 sharp buck teeth were sticking out of its mouth in a grim manner. Its huge muscular body looked as sturdy and dreadful as a mountain. Its fingers were a few feet long, its palms resembled a fan made up of palm leaves. Those fingers had long silver nails that were a few feet long, they looked as sharp as machetes. Blood-stained meat could be faintly seen in the gaps of those nails. Shi Mu was dumbfounded as he realized that he had entered the dreamland. Roar! A loud dragon roar resounded. Suddenly, the flood dragon turned fuzzy, and appeared in front of the ape. Its 9 heads waved, and its 18 big eyes shone fiercely. Then, its huge and bloody mouth stretched open, and started to bite the ape all over its body. The ape raised its head and bellowed. Then, it waved its hands without any trace of fear. Its giant hands fired like electricity, and grabbed the 2 middle necks of the dragon. After that, it exerted extreme force, and punctured its sharp nails into the dragon's necks. A tooth-sawing friction sound was issued as its nails penetrated into the dragon's golden scales. Puff! Puff! Shrill sounds of a sharp blade piercing the flesh had started to ring in a continuous manner. The ape's sharp nails broke the dragon's golden scales, and jabbed into its body. The dragon's blood gushed out into the sea, and colored the sea's surface red. However, the ape's nails hadn't been able to penetrate deep into the dragon's skin owing to the golden scales. Meanwhile, the remaining 7 heads of the dragon continued to bite the shoulders, arms, back, and other places of the ape's body. This made the ape's body look as if it had bathed in blood. But, there was a faint layer of a silver light on the surface of the ape's body. It continued to heal its wounds. So, the ape managed to recover rapidly every time it was wounded. The dragon failed to cause any fatal injury to the ape as a result. Suddenly, an ominous light flashed across the dragon's eyes. Its body twisted and revolved around the ape like a snake's body. It then wound itself around the ape in a firm manner. After that, its body began to tighten up. It exerted an enormous force on the ape's body at the same time. The ape's face turned purplish-red due to the overwhelming force. Roar! The ape raised its head and roared loudly. The silver radiance that had been glowing on the ape's body was suddenly released in abundance. The ape's body bulged and started to push the dragon. The dragon exposed a trace of fear on its face while encountering the mountain-like giant ape. The ape's hands exerted a mighty pressure, and pulled at the dragon's heads before it could respond. A huge strength rushed forth through his hands, and fell on the dragon's heads. Kaka! A dull sound was heard. The middle 2 heads of the dragon were pulled by the ape, this caused huge wounds to the dragon. A massive amount of blood started to gush out of the dragon's wounds, and tainted the sea water. The other 7 heads of the dragon issued a blood-curdling screech due to the intense pain. The dragon loosened its body from around the ape's body. It then started to twist and turn its body frantically. But, it continued to whip the ape's body in this process. That nearly 100 feet long rope-like sturdy body of the dragon bumped against the surrounding huge rocks in a continuous manner. This led to several landslides and fissures. The chaotic sea water gradually turned into a giant whirlpool. Rumble, a loud rumbling sound was heard. The mountain peaks that were located inside the sea crashed down. The whirlpool grew even bigger. Everything within a radius of 100 feet gradually collapsed. It formed a profound and big whirlpool. Roar! The ape bellowed as it exerted a great force to rip apart the two heads of the dragon. Both of the heads were eventually pulled out. A spurt of blood gushed out into the sea like a fountain, and painted the sea water red. The remaining 7 heads of the dragon bellowed in pain. Suddenly, the dragon's huge body twisted, turned around, and transformed into a golden light. It then fled towards a distant place with startling speed. The ape opened its gigantic mouth and pushed one of the 2 severed heads inside it. Then, it started to chew it. After that, it swallowed it down. It then grabbed the other head, pounded it in its mouth, and swallowed it down as well. After that, it transformed into a silver light, and started to rush forward. The silver light of the ape was much faster than the dragon's golden light. The dragon had reached several thousand feet away from the ape by this time. But, it was overtaken by the ape soon after. Another couple of heads of the dragon were grasped by the ape's iron pincers like claws after 10 rounds of battle. The dragon's eyes revealed a frantic color. Its entire body radiated a magnificent golden light. Then, its 7 heads started to recite a strange incantation. The sound of the incantation reverberated in all directions like a muffled thunder. A trace of contemptuous look flashed across the ape's eyes. The silver radiance brightened up as it bellowed. Then, a faint layer of an unusually bright light emerged on its body. The ape exerted a huge force to rip apart the dragon's heads. But, it failed as the dragon's body was covered with a golden light shield. Numerous golden charms started to emerge before the ape's eyes. Then, these charms transformed into several golden beads. They were emitting an intermittent burst of formidable waves. These waves were made of magical power. But, the 7 heads slumped down as soon as the incantation ended. Even the golden light around its body became dimmer. Bang! A thunder explosion resounded. Suddenly, a number of densely packed thunder beads rumbled. It seemed as if the entire seabed was covered with several glaring golden lights along with thunder and lightning. The sea water within a radius of nearly 1,000 feet flared up. Moreover, dozens of feet-high monstrous waves started to howl in the sky. In addition, several hurricanes and tornadoes appeared. They spread an unpleasant murkiness in all directions. There was a huge island within the radius of hundreds of feet of the extended sea area. It was only a few dozen feet long. It was also raided by the billowing waves and raging tornadoes. The entire island shattered into fragments with a violent explosion as a result. In fact, it had been engulfed by the dreadful and monstrous waves within a short span of time. The golden light and thunder gradually dissipated from the seabed. But, the ape's silver light had also turned bleak by then. Moreover, several ghastly wounds had appeared over its body, fresh blood was spurting out of them. The ape flared with rage. Then, its hands exerted a huge force. The 2 heads of the dragon were pulled out with snapping sounds, and were then swallowed down by the ape. Now, the 9-headed flood dragon was left with only 5 heads. Fresh blood was gushing out from its body. It was severely injured. Could it still stand against the giant ape? Its remaining 5 heads were gradually ripped off as well, and were then swallowed down by the ape. The ape grabbed its headless corpse. It then looked upwards, and issued a wild roar. After that, it opened its mouth and dug its teeth into the dragon's corpse. It then started to suck its blood. It tore apart its body and devoured its meat. The boundless flow of the dragon's blood dyed the sea water red. Shi Mu was left dumbfounded as he saw the earth-shaking battle between the 2 beasts. He could now clearly sense the white ape. He felt complacent in his heart. The dragon was soon devoured. Then, the ape patted its bulging belly, and issued a burping sound. After that, its body dazzled with a layer of silvery white radiance. The wounds on its body were engulfed by the silver radiance. Then, a layer of new flesh sprouted all over its body. The ape's body got restored to a better state in the fraction of a second. Even its white hair grew relatively longer. The outward appearance of the ape had been completely restored, as if it had never been injured. The ape hammered its chest out of satisfaction. It then raised its head and roared loudly. Suddenly, its hands seemingly tore something apart. A formidable supernatural power gushed out, and split apart the vast sea from the middle. The entire sea turned into 2,000 feet high water walls as a result. A myriad of marine creatures were swimming on both sides of the water walls. Moreover, a 10 feet wide waterway appeared in the middle. It led to the sea surface. The ape strode swiftly and came to the surface of the sea along the waterway. Then, it raised its hand, as if it was about to pluck the floating clouds. Suddenly, a loud and thunderous sound was heard from the sky. The sky cast a lofty ray of light as multicolored cloud emerged. Then, the cloud descended from the sky. An elderly man sat cross-legged on the cloud. He had long eyebrows, and an expressionless face. The ferocious look of the ape's face faded away as it saw the man. A hint of excitement crawled across its face. Then, its huge body crashed down like a huge jade pillar. It sat in the seawater in order to pay respect to the elderly man. After that, it stuck out its ear in order to listen. However, the elderly man's face was filled with regret. He remained silent for a while. Then, he slowly opened his mouth and uttered a few words. After that, he raised his big sleeves. A streak of golden light flew out of his sleeves, and started to whirl in the air. It then transformed into a big golden ancient book, and floated in front of the ape. Then, the elderly man closed his eyes without waiting for the ape to respond. Then, he turned into a multicolored rainbow along with the multicolored magical cloud, and soared back to the sky. Then, they disappeared. The ape's eyes looked lifeless. It looked reluctant to get up even though the ancient golden book was floating in front of its eyes. It stood up after a long time, and started to beat its chest. It then raised its head, and issued a long roar. Its bellows burst out like a thunderbolt. A large tract of clouds gathered together, and scudded across the sky while exuding black chi. Shi Mu could feel the intense sorrow of the ape. But, he couldn't understand anything. However, Shi Mu was quite curious about the ancient golden book. Therefore, his gaze shifted towards the book. He saw a few rows of silver text on the cover of the book. Suddenly, a few words appeared in his mind: 9 Revolutions Mysterious Art. Shi Mu was pleasantly surprised. He wanted to take a look at the book. But, he started to feel dizzy before he could do anything. Then, his eyes rolled back, and he became unconscious. Chapter 170, The Warrior's Return. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu's body quivered as he regained his consciousness. Then, he slowly opened his eyes. However, he was greeted by a shocking scenario. The 3-headed python's 100 feet long body hung on the mountain wall in front of the cave. It was dead. It seemed to have been destroyed, even its dead body had shriveled up. Its left and right heads were missing, and its middle head was mutilated. Shi Mu was greeted by a whiff of nauseous smell of blood as a result. Shi Mu felt a burst of intense dizziness. He shook his head to dispel it. He then felt a little relaxed. His consciousness gradually became active. He felt a slight chill in his heart as he recalled his mortal injuries and approaching death. He recalled that he had been incarnated into a white ape in the way that was similar to his dreams. He also recalled how he had slaughtered the 3-headed python after a long and fierce battle. But, the ape also seemed to have received a few serious injuries. Shi Mu hastily got up from the ground as he recalled this. He examined his body. He was surprised to notice that his body didn't seem to be harmed in any way. There wasn't even the slightest sign of any injury. However, his body felt flabby and powerless, as if he had just recovered from a serious illness. Shi Mu was even more confused as he sensed his real qi. There was a huge amount of real qi in his lower abdomen and meridians. Shi Mu had a feeling of fullness, as if numerous ants and insects were creeping inside his body. He also had a feeling of discomfort. He felt a fiery hot sensation in his stomach, as if his real qi was steadily rushing forth through his arteries towards his limbs and bones. Shi Mu was startled. He guessed that these changes had something to do with his transformation into the white ape. Moreover, he thought that the fervent fire in his body must be because of the python's essence and blood which he had swallowed in the dream. Shi Mu thought of the dreamland, and the battle between the gigantic white ape and the three-headed python. The memory of devouring the python's flesh and blood made his heart tremble. What he regretted the most was that he couldn't see the contents of the ancient Book of 9 Revolutions' mysterious art even though he had seen its cover. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind. He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. He opened his eyes after a while and frowned. The bean-sized moonlight crystal grain that he had stored for a long time had disappeared from his head. Is it possible that this moonlight crystal grain has something to do with my transformation into the white ape? Shi Mu thought. But, he wasn't sure about this. So, he decided to push this thought out of his mind for the time being. Whatever happened, the fact was that he had turned his defeat into victory. Moreover, his spiritual power had increased owing to the white ape. Shi Mu had mixed feelings in his heart as a result. He felt delighted as he recalled that his strength had surged up at an alarming rate in the form of the white ape, so much so that he had slaughtered a Xiantian middle-stage fierce beast with his bare hands. However, he was also a little worried. He couldn't control his own body after this transformation, as if his own body didn't belong to him. Oh, where is Yan Luo? Suddenly, Shi Mu recalled that Yan Luo had appeared in front of him at the last moment, and had received a fatal blow in order to save him. Shi Mu was sure that he hadn't issued such an order to Yan Luo. He was unlikely to rely on a Houtian primary stage human skeleton to rescue him in such a critical situation. But, Yan Luo had protected Shi Mu on its own. Shi Mu was deeply touched by this. Moreover, a trace of worry grew in his heart for Yan Luo's safety. Fortunately, the spiritual contract between him and Yan Luo still existed. However, it seemed to him that it wasn't a crucial matter at this juncture. He thought that Yan Luo would have returned to the dead spirit world. However, Shi Mu was still puzzled about Yan Luo's attempt to protect its master. He wanted to summon it and clarify his doubts. But, a burst of numbness and discomfort raided his body. It made him unable to concentrate on his spirit. Oh! I almost forgot my main business. Shi Mu patted his forehead and jumped up. He had gone through untold hardships in order to enter into the forbidden area of the portal. Moreover, he had taken the risk of hunting an extremely aggressive three-headed python so that he could obtain its beast soul and break his curse. He vaguely remembered that the white ape had extracted the python's soul and swallowed it down. Shi Mu felt anxious as he thought about this. He closed his eyes once again. He sensed a group of warm air mass creeping amid the group of fervent fire inside his stomach. He could also feel a faint aura of the python inside his stomach. Shi Mu finally felt happy. He decided to open the beast soul bag so that he could store the beast's souls inside it. But, he realized that his upper body was bare. Moreover, there wasn't any trace of the beast soul bag around his waist. He looked around and saw that his black blade lay on the ground. He also noticed that everything he had brought was scattered on the ground around him. In addition, a blood-red leather bag lay on the ground in the nearby bushes. It was the beast soul bag. Shi Mu was delighted. He picked up the bag, and poured his spiritual power into it. Suddenly, his complexion turned unsightly, and his brows puckered into a frown. He remembered that there were more than 10 beast souls of Houtian late and consummate stage beasts in the bag. Moreover, there were countless souls of the primary and middle stage beasts. However, he shook his head and discarded these thoughts. He was most concerned about the soul of the three-headed python. However, his real chi felt a strange shock as he brought the beast soul bag closer to his mouth. Suddenly, the bag lit up and produced a suction. Then, a black ball of light wrapped in silver light flew out of his body. A faint miniature of the three-headed python was ringing inside it. Shi Mu forcibly increased the flow of his real chi. The bag glittered up with a magnificent red light, its suction also increased. Then, the black ball wrapped in silver light flashed and submerged into the beast bag. After that, it disappeared. Shi Mu heaved a sigh of relief. A cheerful look appeared on his face. He then fastened the beast soul bag on his waist carefully. After that, he picked up his packet from the ground, and took out a set of clothes. He then picked up the black blade and examined it. He remembered that his blade had issued a snapping sound when the python had bit it. He found a couple of tiny fissures on its back. But, it wouldn't have any adverse effect on it. He thought that he'd ask Zhao Ping to forge another blade for him once he returns to his sect. Shi Mu looked at the python's corpse stuck in the mountain wall. He walked over to its corpse and stripped down the python's skin from where its scales were intact with the help of his blade. After that, he rolled it up and wrapped it in a piece of cloth. He then threw it on his back, and started to walk towards the python's cave. He soon reached the open space in the python's cave. He sat down cross-legged, and kept his black blade aside. He then closed his eyes and became prepared to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants. He took out a bone-tempering pill, and swallowed it. After that, he exhibited a meditative posture and began his practice. He soon made a breakthrough to the 7th layer of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. His meridians and arteries had been so overloaded by his real chi that they had started to bulge out. Moreover, a fervent group of fire had been creeping inside his abdomen. This had forced him to practice. This was the reason he had become impatient, and had started to practice as soon as he had entered the cave. Shi Mu was ecstatic as he realized that he had reached the 7th stage of the art without any bottleneck. He had made a direct breakthrough. However, his astonishment didn't end there. This breakthrough was followed by the attainment of the 8th stage of this art. The arteries and the tendons inside his meridians were so abundant with his real chi that he had attained another stage at one fell swoop. Shi Mu then swallowed a green frost fruit, and continued to practice for the entire day. He finally stopped once the python's blood in his abdomen had transformed into his real chi. Moreover, he had broken through the 9th stage of the art of breeding heavenly elephants by that time. The bone-tempering pills had also been consumed by this time. Shi Mu had progressed from the Houtian middle stage to Houtian advanced stage in a short span of 2 days. His rate of his growth was so alarming that it could shock anyone. Shi Mu had succeeded in increasing his strength by that of 3 elephants. His strength would further increase if he could also make a breakthrough in the art of breeding the strong evil ape. Then, his strength would get closer to 10,000 pounds, which was far more than that of a Xiantian primary stage warrior. Shi Mu could also attain the remaining 2 layers of the art of breeding heavenly elephants as long as he had time in his hands. This would lead him to progress to the Houtian consummate stage. It was extremely difficult for Shi Mu to advance to the Xiantian realm owing to his blood. But, he still believed that he was capable of giving it a try if he could find an appropriate Xiantian technique, and supplement it by consuming the 3 green frost fruits that remained. After 2 days, in the depth of the python's cave, Shi Mu sat cross-legged on the ground. His eyes were closed, and he was controlling his breathing. Suddenly, a burst of red light glistened around his waist. He opened his eyes and drew out a jade charm from his bosom. It was emitting a bright red light. It was a forbidden charm that had been given to everyone along with the beast soul bag before they had set foot in the portal. It's finally over. Shi Mu felt relieved. He then picked up his black blade, and threw the snakeskin on his back. It was wrapped in a piece of cloth. He then poured his real chi into the jade charm. The bright red light formed a 5 feet thick red circle around Shi Mu's body. Then, the red light flashed, and Shi Mu vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, in the mountain valley behind the holy mountain, 8 priests stood before the black altar in 2 groups near the massive ring-shaped stone array. They had an anxious expression on their faces. They kept looking in the direction of the stone array. Suddenly, the magical characters engraved on the huge rectangular rocks glittered. Then, a massive red light spread, and shrouded the entire stone array. Time's up! The high priest stood on the black altar before the crowd. He had a senile look on his face. He then said something, and waved the withered stick in his hand. A red light sparked on top of the stick, it then flashed to the center of the giant stone array. The red light flickered violently. Then, people's shadows started to appear, it seemed as if red lights were being poured out in torrents. All kinds of tall, short, strong, and thin people were faintly visible through the red light. A few people looked terrible, it seemed as if they had bathed in blood. A few of them held weapons in their hand. Some others were panting. These people weren't strangers. They were the warriors who had entered into the portal a few days ago. The red light continued to shine for a while. Then, it slowly disappeared as everyone appeared. Several tribal people stood at different places on the altar. Some of them looked happy, but a few of them had an unsightly expressions on their faces. The 8 tribes had sent a total of 100 people to enter the forbidden area. However, only 50 to 60 people could be seen standing on the altar. It meant that almost 50% of these people would remain buried inside the portal forever. These people were the elites of their tribes. Therefore, each person's disappearance was a great loss to their respective tribes. These warriors weren't prohibited from getting into a life and death battle in the portal. But, the vicious and peaceful barbarian had reached an understanding that they wouldn't snatch any beast souls from each other. Therefore, no homicide was possible. Moreover, every tribe was familiar with the situation inside the portal of brave warriors. So, any life-threatening danger was unlikely as long as there wasn't any desire for any early achievement. In fact, the death rate had been around 20% during the previous trials.